admitted. When I discovered Mom's letters and sent that first hesitant message, I couldn't have conceived of professional collaboration, joint foundation development, or regular family integration. Nor could I have predicted how completely my life would transform, Thomas acknowledged. 25 years of saving based on inexplicable intuition, yet even in my most optimistic moments, I never envisioned the reality that has emerged as autumn sunlight slanted through the cafe windows, highlighting the silver in Thomas's hair and the family resemblance evident in Noah's features. Both men recognized the new horizon their relationship had reached, no longer defined by discovery or adjustment, but by mature connection capable of withstanding geographic distance and supporting professional collaboration. The Seattle project and Thomas's retirement represented not conclusion, but evolution, another phase in their ongoing journey of connection that had begun with intuitive awareness long before conscious recognition. The foundation they had established would continue developing. Elena and future scholarship recipients would pursue educational paths influenced by their integrated philosophy, and their individual professional contributions would proceed alongside collaborative ventures. To new horizons, Noah proposed, raising his coffee cup in informal toast. And to connections that transcend distance, Thomas responded, completing the sentiment that perfectly captured their shared understanding. As they left the cafe and walked through Preston's familiar streets toward the construction site for one final inspection before day's end, their conversation shifted naturally to practical matters. Foundation board nominations, learning center staffing, holiday planning. The easy flow between profound reflection and mundane details reflected the complete integration of their connection into daily life. No longer extraordinary exception, but established reality. The new horizon before them extended not just toward Seattle and the university project, but toward unlimited possibilities for ongoing connection and contribution. What had begun with one man's inexplicable intuition to save for an unknown child had transformed into shared purpose, extending beyond individual lifetimes, educational initiatives that would benefit generations of students, architectural innovations that would shape community experiences, and most significantly, the living example of connection that had somehow existed beyond conscious awareness until circumstances allowed its recognition. Thomas's 25 years of faithful saving had found fulfillment not merely in financial provision, but in relationship that transcended conventional understanding. A father and son connected across time and distance by bonds that defied logical explanation yet proved more enduring than physical separation or conscious knowledge. As evening approached and they parted ways, Noah returning to Newton, Thomas to his home where retirement preparations and learning center planning awaited, each carried complete certainty that their connection would continue evolving through whatever circumstances life presented. Geographic location, professional projects, and daily routines might shift and change, but the essential bond between them remained constant, grounded in both biological reality and chosen commitment in inherited traits and deliberately cultivated understanding. The new horizon wasn't a destination but a perspective, expanded awareness of possibilities extending beyond current experience into future potential. What had once been separate lives defined by absence and intuitive longing had become integrated, existence characterized by conscious connection and shared purpose. In this transformation lay the true meaning of Thomas's 25 years of saving. Not preparation for specific outcome, but faithful response to connection that existed beyond understanding, patiently waiting for recognition and expression that would ultimately emerge in ways neither man could have imagined, but both now embraced with profound gratitude and continuing wonder. End of story. Glanced at his watch. I should head home. Early client meeting in Newton tomorrow. The phrase "head home" caught Thomas's attention. Noah's easy reference to the blue shuttered house as home, marking another milestone in his transition from visitor to established resident. After Noah departed, Thomas remained in the living room, contemplating the table they had created together. Its surface bore subtle evidence of their collaboration, sections where Thomas's experienced hands had guided the sanding to perfect smoothness, others where Noah's architectural precision had ensured exact alignment of decorative elements. Like their relationship itself, the table represented integration of separate skills and perspectives into cohesive creation. Not flawless, but bearing a character and integrity that manufactured perfection could never achieve. The following weekend brought the first significant holiday of their new shared life, Thomas's birthday, which Noah had insisted on marking with proper celebration, despite Thomas's initial protests that he had never made much of the occasion. 60 isn't just any birthday, Noah had argued. It deserves recognition. The evening found them at Preston's finest restaurant, joined by Susan and her husband David, along with 3 of Thomas's longtime colleagues. The gathering was modest by some standards, but represented the largest birthday celebration Thomas had experienced in years. "I propose a toast," Susan announced after the main course had been served, "to my brother, who has always been the steady center of our family, constant, reliable, quietly extraordinary in ways that become more apparent with each passing year." "To Thomas," the others echoed, raising their glasses. Noah waited until the initial toast had concluded before standing, his own glass raised. "I'd like to add something," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "To the father who saved for a child he didn't know existed, whose inexplicable faith created a bridge across time and distance that eventually brought us together." The simple tribute, offered without elaborate language but with profound sincerity, visibly moved Thomas. The other guests, familiar with the broad outlines of their story but not its emotional depths, watched with quiet respect as father and son acknowledged the mysterious connection that had preceded their actual meeting. After dinner, as they walked back to their cars through Preston's snow-covered streets, Thomas and Noah found themselves slightly separated from the others. "Thank you for this evening," Thomas said quietly. "It meant a great deal." "It's what family does," Noah replied simply. "Marks milestones, celebrates transitions." The casual inclusion of himself within the definition of Thomas's family reflected the transformation that had occurred over the past months. From stranger to son, from biological curiosity to chosen kin. As December progressed, both men found themselves reflecting on the remarkable year now drawing to its close. For Thomas, who had lived most of his life according to predictable patterns and measured expectations, the past 12 months represented unprecedented change. From solitary mathematics teacher faithfully saving for an unknown purpose to father, actively engaged in his adult son's life. For Noah, the transformation had been equally profound. From a man with a defined professional path and established identity, to someone reimagining his life around newly discovered connections and possibilities. One evening, a week before Christmas, Thomas arrived at the blue-shuttered house carrying a carefully wrapped package. Noah welcomed him into the living room, where a small Christmas tree now stood in the window, the first holiday decoration Noah had ever purchased for a home of his own. "This isn't your Christmas gift," Thomas explained, setting the package on the coffee table. "That will come later. This is something else, something I've been working on for several months." Noah unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a leather-bound book with no title on its cover. Opening it, he discovered a chronological collection of photographs, documents, and handwritten notes spanning 25 years, a meticulous record of Thomas's life during the years of their separation. "I realize that while you've shared many stories about your childhood and early career, you know relatively little about my life during those same years," Thomas explained. "This is an attempt to fill that gap, to give you context for the man who saved for you all those years." Noah turned the pages slowly, absorbing the visual narrative Thomas had constructed. Photographs from classroom activities and faculty, events, programs from mathematics conferences, newspaper clippings about educational initiatives, handwritten notes about significant moments and milestones. You collected all this over the years? Noah asked, surprised by the comprehensiveness of the record. Thomas shook his head. I've always kept basic archives, but nothing this organized. After you came into my life, I realized how much of my history was inaccessible to you. I spent the past several months gathering materials from storage boxes, Susan's collections, school archives, anywhere I might find tangible records of those years. The thoughtfulness of this gift, not just the assembled materials but the intention behind them, touched Noah deeply. Thomas had recognized the fundamental asymmetry in their knowledge of each other's lives and had taken concrete steps to address it. This is incredible, Noah said, continuing to turn pages, pausing occasionally to ask questions about specific photographs or events. You've given me 25 years of your life in one book. It's merely documentation, Thomas noted, modestly. The real substance of those years can't be captured in photographs or programs. But it's a starting point, Noah countered. A framework for understanding the man who somehow sensed my existence long before we ever met. As they sat together reviewing the contents of the book, the gathering darkness outside prompted Noah to rise and turn on lamps, transforming the living room into a warm sanctuary against the winter evening. This simple domestic activity, adjusting, lighting, adding wood to the fireplace, offering refreshments, represented the comfortable familiarity they had developed over recent months. I've been reflecting on transformation, Thomas said as they settled back into conversation. How completely my life has changed since receiving your first letter less than a year ago. Noah nodded, understanding exactly what Thomas meant. Sometimes, it feels as though everything has changed, and simultaneously, as if this connection has always existed just beneath the surface of our separate lives. Precisely, Thomas agreed. It's both the most significant disruption I've ever experienced and the most natural evolution imaginable. This paradox, profound change that somehow felt like alignment with pre-existing truth, characterized the journey they had navigated together. The transformation hadn't erased their individual identities or histories, but had integrated them into a new shared narrative that honored both separation and connection. I've been offered a commission to design a community arts center in Concord, Noah mentioned, shifting to more practical matters. It would be my first major project since establishing the firm, potentially leading to similar opportunities throughout the region. That's wonderful news, Thomas replied, genuinely pleased by this professional development. Your business plan identified civic architecture as a primary focus. The interesting part, Noah continued, is how the opportunity arose. One of the committee members is a former student of yours. She recognized my name from a community article about the scholarship fund and made the connection. This unexpected linkage between Thomas's teaching career and Noah's architectural practice represented another strand in the web of connection they were discovering. How their separate lives had created ripples that somehow influenced each other, despite geographic distance and conscious unawareness. As the evening continued, their conversation moved fluidly between reflection on the year now ending and contemplation of the one about to begin. For the first time in either man's life, future plans incorporated not just individual goals and aspirations but shared considerations, holidays to be celebrated together, projects to be collaboratively undertaken, a relationship to be further developed through intentional engagement. The transformation they had experienced, individually and collectively, transcended simple biological recognition or practical life adjustments. It represented a fundamental shift in how each man understood his place in the world. No longer defined solely by profession, location, or established habits, but by a connection that had somehow existed beyond conscious awareness for 25 years before finding expression in their present relationship. As Thomas prepared to leave, gathering his coat and gloves against the winter cold, Noah retrieved something from his desk. I almost forgot, he said, handing Thomas an envelope. The first official notification letter from the Scholarship Foundation. I thought you might want to have it. Thomas opened the envelope, reading the formal confirmation that the Thomas, Mercer and Claire Winters Scholarship had been established, with initial awards to be granted to Preston High graduates the following spring. The document represented concrete implementation of the fund's transformed purpose, no longer savings for an unknown child, but investment in future students who shared the mathematical and creative qualities Noah had undergone initial renovations, transforming the eclectic artist space into a professional design environment where Noah had begun meeting with prospective clients and collaborators. On this particular Sunday afternoon, Thomas and Noah worked side by side in Thomas's garage, converting an old oak table into a conference table for Noah's studio. The woodworking project had become a weekend ritual, providing structured activity around which conversation could flow naturally. "Susan called this morning," Thomas mentioned as he carefully sanded the table's edge. "She's planning the usual Christmas Eve gathering and wanted to confirm we'll both attend." Noah nodded, measuring the brass inlay he was preparing to install. "I told her yes when she invited me last week. Apparently, I'm assigned to bring dessert, something about a family tradition of newcomers providing sweets." Thomas smiled. "A tradition she invented specifically for this occasion, I suspect. Susan has always had a flair for incorporating people into family rituals through assigned responsibilities." "Clever approach," Noah observed. "Creates immediate belonging through participation." This casual exchange represented significant evolution in their relationship. The easy reference to shared family connections, the assumption of joint attendance at holiday celebrations, the comfortable acknowledgement of Noah's integration into Thomas's established life. "I've been thinking about the account," Noah said after a companionable silence. "The original Winters Education Fund." Thomas looked up from his sanding. "Oh?" "It seems appropriate to honor its intended purpose, even if circumstances have changed." Noah set aside his measuring tools and reached for his tablet. "I've drafted a proposal. Would you look it over?" Thomas accepted the tablet, reading carefully as Noah resumed work on the brass inlay. The document outlined a plan to establish a permanent scholarship fund using a portion of the original savings, financial support for Preston High graduates pursuing degrees in mathematics, education, or architectural design. "The Thomas Mercer and Claire Winters Scholarship," Thomas read aloud, his voice catching slightly at the inclusion of both names, "for students demonstrating excellence in mathematical thinking and creative vision. The criteria intentionally blend both perspectives," Noah explained. "Your precision and Mom's creativity, the same combination she noted in me." Thomas continued reading, absorbing the thoughtful structure Noah had designed. A sustainable fund that would provide meaningful support while preserving principle, administered through the existing Preston Education Foundation, with Thomas serving as initial advisory board chair. "This is remarkable," Thomas said finally, looking up from the document. "A perfect transformation of the original intent." Noah returned to the table, carefully positioning the brass inlay along the edge they had prepared. "I thought about what the money truly represents, not just financial resources, but 25 years of faith and commitment. It deserves purpose beyond my business startup costs." Thomas helped align the inlay, their hands working in coordinated precision. "Your mother would approve of this direction," he said quietly. "She always believed education should integrate technical skill with creative vision." "I know," Noah replied. "That's why her name belongs alongside yours on the scholarship. You both shaped my path, though in vastly different ways." This acknowledgement, that Thomas's influence had been real despite his physical absence, touched something deep in their evolving understanding. Claire had provided daily guidance and support, while Thomas's contribution had manifested through the mysterious intuitive connection they had both felt across the years. As they continued working on the table throughout the afternoon, conversation flowed between practical matters and deeper reflections, Noah sharing updates on prospective clients, Thomas recounting amusing classroom anecdotes, both men occasionally venturing into more philosophical territory about connection, purpose, and the nature of family bonds. When evening approached, They moved the completed table into Thomas's living room for the final finishing treatments that required controlled temperature and humidity. "It's going to be perfect for the studio," Noah observed, running his hand along the smooth surface where the brass inlay caught the lamplight. "Though I hate to take it from your house once it's finished." "That was always its purpose," Thomas reminded him. "Besides, I still have the desk and bookshelves we'll start next month." The casual reference to future projects, planned collaborations, extending into the coming year, represented their mutual commitment to ongoing connection, a relationship built not just on discovered biology, but on chosen engagement. Noah, now accustomed places. Thomas in his leather armchair, Noah on the sofa near the window. "I reacted poorly to your suggestion," Noah acknowledged. "The truth is, I'm feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of changes I've initiated. When obstacles arise, they trigger doubts about whether I've made the right decisions." Thomas appreciated this honesty. "That's entirely understandable. You've undertaken enormous life changes in a very short time. But that doesn't justify taking frustration out on you," Noah continued, "especially when you've been nothing but supportive." "Perhaps too supportive," Thomas suggested, surprising Noah with this self-critique. "I've been so determined to make your transition smooth that I may have overlooked how my eagerness to help could feel like pressure." Noah considered this perspective. "It's not pressure exactly. It's more that—" He paused, searching for words. "For 35 years, I've navigated life independently. Decisions, challenges, setbacks. I faced them alone or with friends I chose. Now suddenly there's this new relationship that's simultaneously brand new and profoundly significant. I'm still learning how to integrate it into my identity." This articulation of their unique circumstance resonated deeply with Thomas. "I've experienced similar confusion," he admitted. "For 25 years, I saved for a child I sensed but didn't know. The reality of you, complex, independent, fully formed, is simultaneously everything I hoped for and completely different from what I imagined." The mutual acknowledgement of their adjustment struggles somehow eased the tension between them. The conflict they had experienced wasn't simply about business plans or financial independence, but about the fundamental challenge of integrating a profound connection into lives that had developed separately for decades. "I think," Noah said after a reflective silence, "we've been trying to compress 25 years of relationship development into a few weeks. No wonder we're experiencing growing pains." Thomas smiled at this insight. A mathematician would call that a rate problem, too much change within too compressed a time frame. And an architect would recognize it as a structural issue, building too quickly without allowing proper time for foundations to set, Noah added, returning the smile. The exchange represented their first shared metaphor, a moment of connection through their respective professional perspectives. It marked a subtle but significant shift in their interaction, moving from careful politeness or open conflict to genuine collaboration in understanding their unique situation. "So, how do we proceed?" Thomas asked pragmatically. "How do we build this relationship at a sustainable rate?" Noah considered the question thoughtfully. "I think we need to acknowledge that integration takes time. We can't force decades of connection into months. And we need to recognize that independence and interdependence will fluctuate as we find our balance." "That seems wise," Thomas agreed. "And perhaps we should expect occasional conflicts as natural parts of the process rather than threats to the relationship." "Exactly," Noah said. "Every relationship experiences tension. Ours isn't exempt just because it began unusually." As they continued talking into the evening, the maximum conflict they had experienced revealed itself as a necessary developmental stage, not a threat to their connection, but part of its evolution from theoretical ideal to practical reality. The tension had forced articulation of unspoken expectations and assumptions, creating space for more authentic relationship building. Later, after Noah had retired to the guest room and Thomas sat alone in his study, he reflected on the day's developments with new perspective. The conflict that had initially seemed so threatening now appeared valuable, evidence that their relationship had progressed beyond superficial politeness to genuine engagement with the complexities of merging lives and expectations. The transition they were navigating wasn't simply Noah's relocation or professional reestablishment, but the shared journey of transforming an intuitive connection into a lived reality. With all the challenges, adjustments, and occasional conflicts, such transformation inevitably entailed. December arrived with the first substantial snowfall of the season, transforming Preston into a scene from a New England postcard. Historic buildings outlined in white, pine trees wearing heavy mantles of snow, smoke curling from chimneys against the gray winter sky. 2 months had passed since Noah's return from Seattle, a period marked by substantial progress, both practical and relational. The blue shuttered house had finally been completed, allowing Noah to move from Thomas's guest room to his own space. Close enough for regular connection, but separate enough to maintain independence. The Newton studio. Unpack the groceries and set the table. Superficial conversation replaced the deeper conflict that remained unresolved. Over dinner, Susan chatted about community news, her children's activities, plans for the upcoming holidays, neutral topics that required minimal engagement while allowing emotion to dissipate. "How's the house coming along?" she asked Noah, referring to the blue-shuttered property that was undergoing final renovations before he could move in. "Slower than anticipated," Noah replied, his tone carefully casual. "The bathroom plumbing needed more extensive work than initially thought. Tom's contractor estimates another 2 weeks." Susan nodded sympathetically. "Renovations always take longer than expected. Remember when you updated your kitchen?" she asked Thomas. "What was supposed to be a 2-week project stretched to nearly 2 months. That was different," Thomas noted. "I was doing most of the work myself, fitting it around teaching responsibilities." "Which reminds me," Susan continued, turning back to Noah, "have you considered any local projects while establishing your Boston practice? The community center is forming a committee to explore expansion options. Your expertise would be valuable." The suggestion, though well-intentioned, touched directly on the conflict that had been brewing before her arrival. The question of Noah's professional focus and his integration into the Preston community. "I appreciate the thought," Noah replied, carefully, "but my priority needs to be establishing the firm in Boston. Taking on local projects would dilute that focus." Thomas remained silent, though his expression suggested he had thoughts on the matter. Susan, perceptive as always, glanced between them with growing awareness of the underlying tension. "Have I walked into something?" she asked directly, setting down her fork. "Because I'm sensing some unresolved issues that predated my arrival." Neither man immediately responded, each reluctant to articulate the conflict that had been interrupted but not resolved. "Just typical relocation stress," Noah offered finally. "Lots of moving parts, some not aligning as smoothly as we'd hoped." Susan's expression made clear she wasn't convinced by this explanation, but chose not to press further. "Well, transitions are never easy, especially significant ones. Moving across the country, starting a new business, rebuilding family connections, each would be challenging alone. You're tackling all 3 simultaneously." Her matter-of-fact assessment somehow diffused some of the tension, framing their conflict within the larger context of the substantial changes underway. The evening concluded without further confrontation, though the underlying issues remained unaddressed. After Susan departed, Noah retreated to the guest room that had been his temporary home since returning from Seattle, citing work he needed to complete before morning meetings. Thomas remained in the living room, grading papers with less than his usual focus. The conflict with Noah, their first genuine disagreement since discovering their connection, had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. After 25 years of saving for an unknown child, the reality of building an actual relationship with that child proved more complicated than he had anticipated. The following day, both men maintained careful politeness, navigating around the tension that remained unresolved. Noah departed early for meetings in Boston, while Thomas headed to school for a normal teaching day. The routine separation provided breathing space but postponed necessary conversation. That evening, Noah returned with unexpected news. "I found a space," he announced as he entered the kitchen where Thomas was preparing dinner. "Not in Boston proper, but in Newton, the converted carriage house I mentioned last week. The owner accepted my offer this afternoon." "That's wonderful," Thomas replied, genuinely pleased by this positive development. Newton is an excellent location, still urban but with character and history. "It needs work," Noah cautioned, his excitement tempered by practicality. The previous tenant was an artist who modified the space in ways that don't suit a design studio. But the bones are good and the location is perfect, close to the commuter rail, surrounded by other creative businesses. The shared enthusiasm for this development temporarily bridged the distance that had formed between them, allowing conversation to flow more naturally as they discussed logistics, renovation plans, and timeline implications. After dinner, as they cleared dishes together, Thomas finally broached the subject they had been avoiding. "About yesterday," he began carefully. "I think we need to discuss what happened." Noah nodded, setting down the plate he had been rinsing. "Yes, we do. I've been thinking about it all day." They moved to the living room, each taking their issue. "I've already scheduled initial client meetings for next month. Without a proper workspace, I'll need to delay everything." This setback, while disappointing, was merely the latest in a series of challenges that had emerged since Noah's decision to relocate. The smooth transition both men had envisioned had encountered various obstacles: delayed paperwork for Noah's business registration, unexpected repairs needed at the blue-shuttered house before he could move in, and now the loss of his intended workspace. "Perhaps we should reconsider temporary options," Thomas suggested, his tone carefully measured. "You could use my study until you secure a permanent location, or we might explore short-term leases in Preston while continuing the Boston search." "Working from Preston compromises the whole concept," Noah replied with unusual sharpness. "The firm needs urban positioning, proximity to potential clients and collaborators. That's fundamental to the business model." Thomas absorbed this response without comment, recognizing the stress underlying Noah's tone. The past weeks had tested both men's patience and adaptability, as they navigated not just the practical challenges of Noah's relocation, but the emotional complexity of their evolving relationship. Despite Noah's decision to move east, a commitment to building a future that included Thomas, the actual implementation of this choice had created unexpected tensions. The theoretical ideal of father and son establishing connection had confronted practical realities of two independent adults, with established habits and preferences attempting to accommodate each other. "I'm meeting with another agent tomorrow," Noah said after a moment, his voice calmer. "She's identified 3 potential properties in Cambridge that might work, though they're at the upper limit of my budget. The account could provide additional capital if needed," Thomas reminded him, referring to the fund that had initiated their connection. Noah's expression tightened again. "We've discussed this. I'm using a portion as startup funding, but I need to establish this business independently. Financial entanglement would complicate our relationship." The principle Noah had articulated made logical sense, yet Thomas couldn't help feeling that the boundary reflected lingering uncertainty about their connection. A protective barrier against complete interdependence. "Of course," Thomas agreed, though something in his tone must have communicated his underlying thoughts. Noah paused his pacing, studying Thomas with sudden intensity. "What?" "Nothing," Thomas replied automatically. The habit of conflict avoidance asserting itself. "No, you clearly have something to say," Noah pressed. "Let's hear it." Thomas considered his response carefully, aware they were approaching sensitive territory. "I'm merely observing that independence and interdependence aren't mutually exclusive concepts. Family relationships typically involve both. And you think I'm being too independent?" Noah's tone held a defensive edge that signaled rising tension. "I think," Thomas replied with deliberate calm. That we're both navigating unfamiliar terrain. There's no established protocol for our situation. Noah resumed pacing, his movements more agitated. This isn't just about us. It's about establishing a viable business in an extremely competitive market. Every decision affects not just personal relationships, but professional viability. I understand that, Thomas assured him. I'm simply suggesting that accepting support doesn't compromise your autonomy. Easy for you to say, Noah responded, his voice rising slightly. You're not the one starting over at 35, leaving a stable career, relocating across the country. You get to remain in your comfortable routine while I'm dismantling and reconstructing my entire life. The underlying resentment in this statement surprised both men. Noah immediately looked regretful, while Thomas absorbed the outburst with visible concern. I apologize, Noah said after a moment. That was unfair and uncalled for. Thomas shook his head. No, it's a valid perspective. This transition affects you far more profoundly than it affects me. I should be more mindful of that reality. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Their first significant tension since Noah's return from Seattle. The honeymoon period of their reunion had given way to the more complex reality of merging lives and expectations that had developed independently for 35 years. The doorbell interrupted their standoff. Thomas answered to find Susan on the porch, arms laden with grocery bags. I brought dinner, she announced, brushing past Thomas into the house. I figured with all the moving logistics, cooking might be low priority. Her arrival shifted the atmosphere, providing welcome distraction from the tension that had been building. As they helped, romanticizing a biological connection, attributing cosmic significance to what might be mere coincidence. Later that night, unable to sleep, Noah found himself drawn to the small wooden box where he kept his mother's letters. He selected one, dated from his 10th birthday, a period when, according to Claire's journal, she had seriously considered reaching out to Thomas. Today our son built a model bridge that stunned his science teacher, she had written. As I watched him work, measuring twice, calculating load distributions, testing hypotheses, I saw you so clearly in his methodical approach. Yet when he decided to paint the bridge sunset colors instead of standard gray, I recognized myself in his artistic impulse. He is the perfect integration of us both, Thomas, in ways neither of us could have predicted or designed. Noah had read these words many times, but tonight they resonated differently. His mother had recognized the genetic inheritance evident in his personality and aptitudes. Thomas's mathematical precision blended with her creative vision. What if there were connections that transcended physical distance and conscious awareness? What if Thomas's intuitive saving and Noah's lifelong sense that something was missing weren't coincidental but connected? Two manifestations of the same underlying reality. In the morning, Noah visited his mother's grave, bringing fresh flowers and questions that couldn't be answered. The simple granite marker bore only her name, dates, and the phrase she had chosen herself. Connection transcends comprehension. Did you know? Noah asked aloud, feeling simultaneously foolish and desperate for understanding. Did you somehow sense that he was saving for me all those years? Is that why you finally wrote those letters, even if you couldn't bring yourself to send them? Only silence answered him. Yet in that silence, Noah experienced a profound moment of clarity. The answer to his current dilemma couldn't be found through logical analysis or careful weighing of professional advantages. It required the same leap of faith that had guided Thomas for 25 years. Trust in an intuition that defied conventional explanation. Over the next several days, Noah methodically prepared for both possible futures. He began packing non-essential items, sorted possessions into categories to keep or donate, and met with a realtor to discuss selling his apartment should he choose to relocate. Simultaneously, he updated his Seattle business plan, renewed professional contacts, and researched local properties that might serve as office space for an independent practice. Maintaining these parallel tracks allowed him to postpone final decision-making, while completing necessary preparations. Each evening, he spoke with Thomas by phone or video call, sharing the day's activities and receiving updates on life in Preston. These conversations carefully avoided direct discussion of Noah's pending decision, though the question hovered unspoken between them. A week after his return to Seattle, Noah received an unexpected package at his apartment. The return address indicated it was from Susan, Thomas's sister. Inside, he found a small wooden box with geometric inlays, similar to ones he had seen in Thomas's home, clearly crafted by the same hands, and a handwritten note. "Noah," Susan had written, "my brother is too respectful of your autonomy to share this with you. But as his interfering sister, I have no such reservations. The enclosed box contains something you should see before making your decision. No pressure, of course, just additional context that might be relevant. Fondly, Susan." Inside the box, Noah found a collection of small items. A hospital bracelet dated from his birth, though with no name attached. A Seattle newspaper clipping announcing an architectural award Claire had received when Noah was 12. A photograph of a young Noah at a science fair, clearly cut from a newspaper. And most surprisingly, sketches of playground equipment that looked remarkably similar to designs Noah had created for a community project in graduate school. Beneath these items lay a journal with faded blue covers. Opening it, Noah recognized Thomas's precise handwriting. The entries dated in sequential order beginning 25 years earlier, exactly when Thomas had opened the savings account. "Dream again last night," the first entry read. "Child building. With blocks, creating structures far beyond typical ability. Woke with absolute certainty this wasn't merely a dream, but a glimpse of something real. Opened savings account today. Cannot explain this certainty, but cannot ignore it either." Noah sat on his couch, the journal open in his lap. As outside his window, Seattle continued its normal rhythms. Ferry horns sounding across Elliott Bay, the distant hum of traffic, neighbors returning from work. The familiar soundtrack of his life for the past decade continued unchanged, while Noah's understanding of his connection to Thomas underwent profound transformation. The journal entries continued sporadically over the years, brief notations of dreams or inexplicable moments of awareness that Thomas had faithfully recorded, never attempting to rationalize or dismiss them. Dreamt of a boy, approximately 8 years old, winning science competition with bridge model. Felt overwhelming pride, though no rational explanation for this emotion. Compulsion. Today to research architectural programs at West Coast universities. No logical reason for this interest, yet spent hours comparing curricula at UCLA, Berkeley, Washington. Dream of young man designing community center with distinctive roof structure. Detail so vivid could almost draw it. Woke with certainty. This person is connected to me somehow. Noah recognized the designs described in several entries, projects he had actually completed, milestones in his education and career that Thomas could not possibly have known about, yet had somehow sensed, across the distance separating them. The final entry was dated just 2 days before Noah's first letter had arrived. Strongest sense yet that something is about to change. Cannot explain this certainty, but trust it as I've trusted these inexplicable connections for 25 years. Whatever comes next feels significant, foundational. Noah closed the journal, overwhelmed by its implications. Thomas hadn't merely saved money based on vague intuition. He had experienced specific, detailed awareness of Noah's life and development that defied logical explanation. The journal documented not just faithful financial commitment, but a form of connection that transcended physical separation and conscious knowledge. This revelation transformed Noah's understanding of his relationship with Thomas. What he had attributed to coincidence or perhaps subconscious psychological needs now appeared as something far more profound. A connection that had existed in some form throughout his life, unacknowledged but persistently present. Noah reached for his phone, intending to call Thomas immediately, then hesitated. This wasn't a conversation to have at a distance. The profound revelation contained in Thomas's journal deserved direct, in-person discussion, not just about its factual content, but about its implications for their shared future. With sudden clarity, Noah recognized that the decision he had been struggling to make had already been made, not through logical analysis or professional calculation, but through the same inexplicable certainty that had guided Thomas for 25 years. That evening, Noah called Marcus to formally resign from the firm, contacted his realtor to list his apartment, and booked a one-way flight to Boston. The practical details of relocation would require time and effort to resolve, but the fundamental decision, to embrace the connection that had existed long before conscious recognition, felt not like a leap into uncertainty, but a return to something essential and true. Before going to bed, Noah sent Thomas a simple text message. "Coming home on Thursday, much to discuss. Found my answer." Thomas's reply arrived moments later, equally simple yet filled with understood meaning. "The guest room awaits, though perhaps not for long." In this exchange lay the shared acknowledgement that Noah's return to Preston represented not a temporary visit, but a decisive step toward establishing a new life, one that honored the connection they had both sensed, in different ways long before they ever met. The Boston real estate agent's voice conveyed barely concealed frustration as she delivered the news over Noah's speakerphone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Winters, but the owner accepted another offer on the Seaport District property. They moved surprisingly quickly." Thomas watched Noah's expression tighten as he absorbed this setback. "Was it the contingency clause?" Noah asked, referring to the provision that made his offer dependent on securing proper permits for conversion to a design studio. "Partly," the agent admitted. "The winning bid was considerably higher and came without conditions." After ending the call, Noah paced Thomas's living room, tension evident in his movements. 3 weeks had passed since his return from Seattle, weeks filled with focused activity, as he established legal foundations for his new firm, researched properties, and gradually transferred his life from West Coast to East. "It's a significant setback," Noah acknowledged, running a hand through his hair. "That space was perfect. The light, the location, the architectural features. I've based my entire business plan on that type of conversion." "There will be other properties," Thomas offered pragmatically. "Boston has no shortage of historical buildings with potential." Noah nodded abstractly, his mind clearly still processing implications. The timing is the real, awaited with its familiar rhythms and established connections. The decision that would shape the next phase of Noah's life, and Thomas's, remained unmade, suspended between competing certainties and compelling possibilities. But the decisive moment had arrived. Within 2 weeks, Noah would choose which future to embrace. Seattle greeted Noah with familiar gray skies and the distant silhouette of Mount Rainier barely visible through morning mist. His apartment felt simultaneously comforting and strange. Everything exactly as he'd left it 6 weeks earlier, yet somehow different. Or perhaps it was Noah himself who had changed. He spent his first day back handling practical matters, meeting with his boss to discuss departure options, connecting with colleagues, sorting through accumulated mail. The firm's management seemed unsurprised by his inclination toward leaving, suggesting they had anticipated his decision even before he had made it himself. "The severance package is generous," Marcus, his supervisor, explained. 3-month salary, extended health benefits, and our commitment not to enforce the non-compete clause if you establish your own practice. We value the work you've done. Here, Noah. We'd prefer you stay, but we understand your desire to chart your own course. That evening, Noah met his closest friends for dinner at their favorite restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. Eliza, James, and Miguel had been his support system since graduate school, sharing professional milestones and personal challenges with equal investment. "So," Eliza asked once they had ordered, "tell us everything. How's math, Dad? Did you solve the mystery of the psychic savings account? Are you moving to the land of lobster rolls and harsh winters?" Noah laughed, grateful for friends who could transform life-altering decisions into manageable conversation. "Thomas is remarkable," he began. then found himself sharing more than he had intended. Not just practical details about Preston and potential business plans, but emotional revelations about connection, intuition, and the strange experience of recognizing parts of himself in a man he had only recently met. "Wait," Miguel interrupted. "He saved for 25 years without knowing you existed, based on dreams and a feeling?" "I know it sounds unbelievable," Noah acknowledged. "I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen the bank statements, the meticulous records he kept all those years." His friends exchanged glances that Noah couldn't quite interpret. "What?" he prompted. "It's just," James began, then hesitated. "It's a lot to process. You disappear for 6 weeks and come back considering a complete life change based on a connection with someone you just met." "He's not just someone," Noah corrected. "He's my father." "Biologically, yes," James agreed carefully. "But relationships aren't built on DNA. They're built on shared history, consistent presence, mutual understanding. You and Thomas are essentially strangers who happen to share genetic material." The assessment stung, though Noah recognized the concern behind it. "We were strangers," he conceded. "We're not anymore." "Noah," Eliza said gently, "we're not saying the connection isn't real or meaningful. We're just suggesting that major life decisions require perspective. Moving across the country, starting a new business, restructuring your entire life. These are significant changes to make based on a 6-week relationship, no matter how profound it feels." Noah understood their skepticism, even appreciated the protective instinct behind it, yet something in him resisted their framing of the situation. "What if it's more than that?" he asked. "What if this connection with Thomas isn't just about discovered paternity, but about something deeper? Some bond that existed before we even met?" Miguel smiled kindly. "Now you sound like your mother. Remember how she used to talk about quantum entanglement and energetic connections?" "Maybe she was onto something," Noah replied, surprising himself with this departure from his typically pragmatic perspective. "How else do you explain Thomas saving for 25 years based on nothing but intuition?" "People do all sorts of irrational things," James pointed out. "The human mind is skilled at constructing narratives to explain random behaviors and coincidences." Noah shook his head, frustrated by the inability to articulate what he had experienced in Preston, not just the factual reality of Thomas's years of saving, but the inexplicable sense of recognition and belonging he had felt almost immediately upon meeting his father. The conversation eventually shifted to other topics: Miguel's recent promotion, Eliza's new apartment, James's ongoing dissertation research. Yet Noah remained preoccupied with the challenge his friend's perspective presented. Were they right to question the foundation of his potential life change? Was he just a 10-minute walk? Noah leaned against the porch railing, suddenly understanding the purpose of this visit. "You're not just showing me a renovation project, are you?" Thomas smiled slightly. "No, I'm not. You're offering me a place to live if I choose Boston." "I'm presenting an option," Thomas clarified. "The house will need someone to care for it regardless. If you decide to establish your practice in Boston, it would be available to you. If not, I'll likely rent it out." Noah surveyed the property again with this new understanding. The house was modest by urban standards but spacious for a single occupant, its character and craftsmanship evident in every detail. The setting offered both community and solitude, connection to nature without isolation. "Why not sell it?" Noah asked, testing Thomas's intentions. "It must be worth a considerable sum, especially with the renovations you've done." "Some values can't be measured in market terms," Thomas replied simply. "This was my aunt's home for 40 years. She left it to me because she trusted me to honor its history, to ensure it passed to someone who would appreciate its character." The unspoken implication hung between them, that Noah might be that someone, that Thomas saw him as worthy of this inheritance, this connection to family history. "It would need to be a proper arrangement," Noah said, his practical side asserting itself even as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Market rate rent, clear terms, Of course, Thomas agreed readily. I wouldn't want it any other way. They stood side by side on the porch, looking out at the garden where late autumn flowers still bloomed against the weathered stone wall. Neither spoke for several minutes, each contemplating the potential future represented by this house. A future that included regular proximity, the chance to continue building the relationship they'd begun exploring. I need to make this decision based on what's right for me professionally, Noah said finally, voicing the complexity of his position. Absolutely, Thomas concurred. The house is simply an option, not a persuasion. Yet they both recognized that the house represented more than shelter. It symbolized continuity, connection, the possibility of putting down roots in soil already prepared by family history. Sunday arrived with the stark reality of temporary separation. At the airport, Thomas and Noah faced each other awkwardly, neither entirely comfortable with the emotional weight of the moment. "Call when you land," Thomas said, his tone deliberately casual. "Just so I know you arrived safely." Noah nodded. "I will." They had spent their final days together discussing practical matters, Noah's timeline for decision-making, logistics of potential relocation, arrangements for staying in touch. During their separation, these concrete details had provided a framework for managing the emotion of parting. "Whatever you decide," Thomas said as the boarding announcement sounded, "we'll make it work." Noah recognized the gift in this statement. Assurance without pressure, support without expectation. "I know we will," he replied, briefly clasping Thomas's shoulder before turning toward the gate. On the plane, watching New England's autumn landscape recede beneath him, Noah felt the complex pull of competing commitments. Ahead lay Seattle, familiar, established, the only home he had ever known. Behind lay Preston, new yet somehow deeply resonant, the unexpected sanctuary he had discovered through Claire's unsent letters and Thomas's faithful saving. The decision before him wasn't simply professional, Boston versus Seattle, entrepreneurship versus corporate stability. It was existential, which life to choose, which self to become, which future to embrace. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Noah opened his tablet to review his business plans once more. The Boston and Seattle versions sat side by side in his files, each representing a distinct vision of his future. With characteristic methodical care, he began analyzing the factors that would influence his decision: market opportunities, startup costs, client potential, quality of life considerations. Yet beneath these practical assessments lay the decisive reality he had been circling for weeks. The account that had brought him to Preston contained not just money, but meaning. Thomas had saved faithfully for 25 years, guided by an intuition he couldn't explain but wouldn't ignore. Now Noah faced his own intuitive crossroads, the path forward clouded by emotion, yet illuminated by possibility. The flight attendant announced their cruising altitude as Noah closed his tablet, recognizing that some decisions couldn't be made through analysis alone. This moment required more than calculation. It demanded courage to follow the same kind of inexplicable certainty that had guided Thomas for 25 years. 3,000 miles west, Seattle, Thomas's hands. "I'm not choosing Boston solely because of you, but I'm not pretending you're not a factor either." Thomas nodded, understanding the nuanced position Noah had articulated. "When do you need to decide?" "The firm needs my answer by next Friday," Noah said. "But if I'm going to establish my own practice in Boston, I need to secure space, file incorporation papers, begin client outreach, all of which requires decisive action now." "And if you choose to return to Seattle?" Noah considered this alternative pathway, resuming his position at the restructured firm, returning to his apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, reconnecting with friends and colleagues, continuing the life he had built over the past decade. "Then I'd maintain connection with you through regular visits, video calls, shared holidays," he said. "We've found each other now. Distance wouldn't change that." Thomas set the tablet aside and rose, moving to the window where morning light illuminated the changing autumn leaves in his yard. "When I was your age," he said after a moment, "I faced a similar decision. Preston High had offered me a permanent teaching position, but Columbia University had extended an invitation to join their mathematics department. More prestige, higher salary, greater academic opportunities." This was new information to Noah. "You never mentioned that." "It wasn't relevant until now," Thomas replied. "The point is, I chose Preston. Many of my colleagues considered it the lesser option professionally, but it allowed me to care for my parents as they aged, to maintain connection with Susan and her family, to build a life in a community where I felt grounded." "Do you regret the choice?" Noah asked, genuinely curious about his father's perspective on such decisions. "Not for a moment," Thomas said without hesitation. "The academic recognition I might have achieved at Columbia seems insignificant compared to the relationships I've nurtured here, the students I've mentored, the life I've built. That's not to say your decision should mirror mine, only that conventional metrics of success don't always align with what ultimately brings fulfillment." Noah absorbed this wisdom, recognizing that Thomas was offering perspective without pressure, sharing his experience while respecting Noah's autonomy to chart his own course. "I need to return to Seattle regardless," Noah said after a moment, "to finalize matters with the firm, pack my apartment if I decide to relocate, say proper goodbyes to friends." Thomas nodded, understanding the practical necessities involved. "In major life transitions, when would you leave?" "I've booked a flight for Sunday," Noah replied. "I should be able to resolve everything within 2 weeks, perhaps less if I decide definitively on Boston." The imminent separation, even if potentially temporary, cast a shadow over their conversation. For 5 weeks they had developed routines and rhythms together, gradually building the relationship that circumstance had denied them for 25 years. The prospect of disrupting this newfound connection, even briefly, felt like a step backward. "I'd like to show you something before you go," Thomas said, his tone suggesting he'd been considering this moment for some time. "Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Noah nodded, curious about what Thomas had in mind. "My schedule is open." The following day, Thomas drove them to a part of Preston that Noah hadn't yet visited, a quiet neighborhood of well-maintained older homes nestled against a nature preserve. They parked in front of a small white house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, surrounded by mature oak trees. "Whose home is this?" Noah asked as they walked up the flagstone path. "Currently no one's," Thomas replied, retrieving a key from his pocket. "It belonged to my Aunt Evelyn. She passed away last year and I inherited the property. I've been slowly renovating it on weekends." Noah followed Thomas inside, immediately noting the craftsmanship evident in the restored hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves flanking a river stone fireplace, the updated kitchen that maintained the home's vintage character. "This is beautiful work," Noah said, running his hand along a perfectly refinished banister. "I didn't realize you were so skilled at restoration." "It's been a hobby for years," Thomas explained. "Woodworking, basic construction, mathematics, teaches precision. The rest is just practice and patience." They toured the house room by room. 2 bedrooms upstairs with sloped ceilings and window seats. A sunroom similar to the one in Thomas's home, but overlooking a small garden rather than a yard. A partially finished basement that Thomas envisioned as a workshop. "The location is ideal," Thomas commented as they stood on the back porch. "Close enough to town for convenience, but adjacent to the conservation land for privacy. The commuter rail station is..." Or perhaps my subconscious detected something my conscious mind missed. This acknowledgement of mystery, from a man whose life had been dedicated to mathematical certainty, struck Noah as profoundly meaningful. Some questions had no definitive answers, only possibilities to be explored. The revelation in Claire's letter represented a significant complication in their evolving relationship, not an insurmountable obstacle, but a challenge that required both men to re-examine assumptions and adjust their understanding of shared history. As they bid each other good night, Noah realized that despite the unsettling revelations of the day, the foundation they had built over the past weeks remained solid. If anything, Thomas's measured, compassionate response to Claire's letter had strengthened Noah's respect for the father he was still getting to know. A month after Noah's arrival in Preston, the DNA test results appeared in his email inbox. Though neither man had doubted the biological connection between them, the physical resemblance and inexplicable bond too strong to question, they had proceeded with testing as a formality, a scientific confirmation of what they already knew: their hearts. 99.8% probability of paternity, Noah read aloud from his laptop screen as they sat together in the sunroom, morning light streaming through the windows. Not that we needed a laboratory to tell us. What's obvious to anyone with eyes? Thomas smiled, though his expression held a touch of wistfulness. It's strange to have such a fundamental relationship reduced to percentages and probability, says the mathematician, Noah teased gently. Perhaps that's precisely why it strikes me as insufficient, Thomas replied. I've spent my career working with numbers, yet some truths exist beyond calculation. The official confirmation, however expected, carried symbolic weight for both men. It represented another threshold crossed in their evolving relationship, from the uncertainty of strangers to the verified reality of father and son. I spoke with my boss in Seattle yesterday, Noah said after a moment, changing the subject to something that had been on his mind for days, about extending my leave of absence. Thomas looked up from his coffee, his expression carefully neutral, despite the hope evident in his eyes. Oh, it's not possible, unfortunately, Noah continued. The firm's restructuring is accelerating, and they need definitive decisions from all senior staff by the end of next week. I see, Thomas said quietly. So you'll be returning to Seattle soon? Noah set aside his laptop and leaned forward, elbows on knees. That's one option. The other is resignation. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Resignation meant more than leaving a job. It represented a fundamental life change, a decisive step away from the established path Noah had followed for years. That's a significant decision, Thomas observed. Not one you should make hastily. Nothing about it feels hasty, Noah replied. I've been developing the business plan for my own firm for over a year. The timing is actually fortuitous. The merger at my current company means generous severance packages for those who choose to leave. And the location? Thomas asked, the question that really mattered hovering just beneath the surface. Noah retrieved his tablet from the side table and opened a document. I've been researching properties in Boston, he said, passing the tablet to Thomas. This former warehouse in the Seaport district has potential. High ceilings, excellent natural light, proximity to public transportation. It could be converted into a studio space with minimal renovation. Thomas studied the images carefully, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Boston is a competitive market for architecture firms. It is, Noah agreed. But there's a growing demand for sustainable community spaces, public libraries, community centers, mixed-use developments that prioritize environmental impact and social connectivity. That's the niche I want to target. And Preston? Thomas asked finally, voicing the question that truly concerned him. Where does it fit in this vision? Noah smiled. 40 minutes by commuter rail from Boston, close enough for daily trips if necessary, but far enough to maintain separation between work and home. The implication was clear. Noah was considering Preston as home, not just Thomas's home, but potentially his own. I don't want you making this decision based on our relationship, Thomas said carefully. Your career, your life direction, these are choices that should reflect your own priorities, not a sense of obligation to me. I appreciate that, Noah replied. But one thing I've learned over the past month is that relationships and life directions aren't separate categories. They inform each other. He gestured to the tablet still in. Happened between you and Mom. Thomas nodded slowly. It was a long time ago. We were different people then. She misrepresented your position, Noah pointed out. For years, I thought you simply weren't ready for fatherhood. Perhaps I wasn't, Thomas conceded. Though I'll never know for certain, will I? That choice was made for me. The pain in this simple statement hung in the air between them. I'm sorry, Noah said, though he knew the apology wasn't his to make. You have nothing to apologize for, Thomas assured him. None of this was your doing. He closed the laptop carefully. May I ask what you're thinking now, having read this? Noah considered the question. I'm thinking that people are more complicated than the stories we tell about them, and that Mom was right about one thing. You valued partnership and honesty. I see that in you now. Thomas seemed touched by this observation. Your mother was an extraordinary woman, he said after a moment. Talented, passionate, determined. This letter doesn't change that. But it does change how I understand what happened, Noah persisted. Why you weren't in my life. Does it matter now? Thomas asked gently. We can't change the past, only how we move forward from here. Noah thought about this pragmatic response, so characteristic of Thomas, who had always focused on what could be done rather than what might have been. I suppose that's true, he acknowledged. But understanding the past helps me make sense of the present. Thomas nodded in agreement. Fair enough. What sense are you making of it? The directness of the question challenged Noah to articulate thoughts that were still forming. I'm wondering how things might have been different if Mom had been honest with you from the beginning. If knowing about me might have changed what happened between you. I've wondered the same thing every day since receiving your first letter, Thomas admitted. But such speculation leads nowhere useful. We have now, Noah. That's the reality we can actually shape. This perspective, focusing on present possibilities rather than past alternatives, resonated with Noah's own evolving philosophy. Yet he couldn't entirely dismiss the significance of what he'd learned. Do you forgive her? He asked suddenly. For not telling you about me? Thomas considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Forgiveness implies continuing anger, and I passed through anger long ago, he said finally. What I feel now is something more complex. Regret for what all three of us missed. Acknowledgement that Claire made the best decision she could with the information and emotions she had at the time, and profound gratitude that despite everything, you've found your way to me now. The wisdom in this response, the absence of bitterness, the recognition of human complexity, moved Noah deeply. It reflected a lifetime of reflection, of finding peace with circumstances beyond control. I'm still angry, Noah admitted, not at either of you specifically, but at the situation. At 25 years, that can't be recovered. That's understandable, Thomas said. You've had less time to process all this, but consider this perspective. If Claire had made a different choice, you would have grown up in Preston rather than Seattle. You would have had different friends, different influences, perhaps even different career interests. You wouldn't be the exact person you are now, the person sitting across from me, whom I'm coming to know and deeply respect. This observation, that different choices would have created a different Noah, gave him pause. His existence as he knew it was the product of his mother's decision, however flawed that decision might have been. That's a perspective I hadn't considered, Noah acknowledged. Thomas smiled slightly. Mathematics teaches us to examine problems from multiple angles. Sometimes the solution looks entirely different when viewed from a new vantage point. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, each processing the implications of Claire's revelation in his own way. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall, drumming softly against the windows of Thomas's study. There's one more thing I've been wondering about, Noah said finally. Something I can't quite reconcile. What's that? If you didn't know Mom was pregnant, what explains the dreams you had after she left? The intuition that led you to start saving money for me? Thomas shook his head slowly. I have no rational explanation. I never have. All I know is that something in me sensed a connection that existed beyond my conscious knowledge. Do you think on some level you knew? Noah pressed. That somehow you sensed what Mom hadn't told you? I don't know, Thomas replied honestly. I've spent 25 years trying to understand it myself. Perhaps there are connections between people that transcend ordinary understanding. You in him. Your thoughtfulness, your precision, your quiet integrity. I took something precious from both of you by making the decision alone. I'm not sure I'll ever find the courage to send this letter, to disrupt the lives you've both built, separately. But I want you to know that not a day passes that I don't think about what might have been. Noah had read these words dozens of times since discovering the letters, but tonight they resonated differently. His mother had worried about disrupting established lives by revealing the truth. Now Noah faced a similar inflection point, continuing the separate existence he had always known, or embracing the connection that had materialized so unexpectedly. The next morning, Thomas was surprised to find Noah already in the kitchen when he came downstairs at his usual early hour. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Noah began without preamble. About mathematics being the journey from question to solution. Thomas nodded, reaching automatically for the coffee maker. Yes? I think I've been focusing too much on the destination, Noah continued. Trying to make a definitive decision about where my life is headed rather than understanding the path I'm on. Thomas poured coffee for them both, his movements deliberate as he considered Noah's words. And what path is that? One that led me here, Noah replied simply. To you, to this connection neither of us can fully explain, but both of us feel. Outside the kitchen window, early morning light illuminated the changing leaves of the maple tree in Thomas's yard, vibrant red and gold against the clear blue sky, a natural representation of transformation. I'd like to extend my stay, Noah, and give myself time to truly explore both business options, if that's all right with you. The careful restraint in Thomas's expression gave way to unguarded joy. More than all right, he replied. I'd like that very much. As they settled into their morning routine, Thomas preparing toast, Noah slicing fruit, each man recognized that something fundamental had shifted. The tentative connection between them had deepened into something more substantial, a relationship built not just on biological reality, but on mutual choice, on the decision to journey forward together rather than separately. For Thomas, it represented the fulfillment of an intuition he had followed faithfully for 25 years. For Noah, it offered a new perspective on his past and future, a chance to integrate the missing piece that had always hovered at the edges of his identity. Neither man could predict where this path would ultimately lead, but both understood they had crossed a threshold. The perspective shift was as subtle yet profound as the changing seasons outside the window, summer's certainties giving way to autumn's possibilities, familiar landscapes transformed by new colors and light. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into Noah's extended stay. Thomas was at school teaching, and Noah sat alone at the kitchen table, his laptop, open to the latest iteration of his business plan. The notification appeared with a soft chime, a message from James Harmon, the attorney who had handled Claire's will and the subsequent disposition of her assets. Noah, the email began, I hope this finds you well. I've been going through the final paperwork regarding your mother's estate and discovered something I believe you should know. Among your mother's safety deposit box contents was a sealed envelope marked for Noah in the event he locates Thomas Mercer. Given recent events, it seems appropriate to forward this to you now. I've scanned the contents and attached them to this email. Please call if you have any questions. Noah's hand hovered over the mouse, a sudden apprehension making him hesitate before clicking the attachment. The document loaded slowly, revealing his mother's handwriting, more rushed and uneven than her usual careful script, likely written during her final days. My dearest Noah, she had written, if you're reading this, you've found Thomas and chosen to contact him. There's something I haven't told you, something I've struggled with for years. The story I shared about why I left Preston, the career opportunity, the fear that Thomas wasn't ready for fatherhood, wasn't entirely truthful. Noah sat back, his breath catching. The narrative of his parents' separation had been a foundational story in his understanding of his own origins. What could his mother have omitted? The truth is more complicated, Claire's letter continued. Thomas and I argued the night before I left. He had found preliminary sketches for a project I'd been offered in Seattle, an opportunity I hadn't yet discussed with him. He felt betrayed that I was making plans that might take me across the country without consulting him. In the heat of the moment, he said something I've never forgotten. "I can't build a life with someone who makes unilateral decisions about our future." The irony of what I did next has never escaped me. I made the most unilateral decision possible. I left without telling him I was pregnant with you. My pride was wounded, and I convinced myself I was protecting both of us from a relationship that would inevitably fail. Only years later did I realize the magnitude of what I'd done, depriving you of a father and Thomas of a son. By then it seemed too late to undo the damage without causing more pain. I'm sharing this now because you deserve the complete truth. As you build a relationship with Thomas, he wasn't simply not ready for fatherhood, as I've allowed you to believe. He was a man who valued partnership and honesty, qualities I failed to honor in my actions. Forgive me for my cowardice in not telling you this while I was alive, and please don't judge Thomas harshly for words spoken in anger 25 years ago. We were both young, stubborn, and afraid of different things. All my love, Mom. Noah read the letter twice more, his mind struggling to reconcile this new information with the narrative he'd accepted his entire life. The revelation cast Thomas in a different light, not as the unprepared young man who might have impeded Claire's career, but as someone who had valued collaboration and transparency in relationships. It also reframed his mother's decisions, adding layers of complexity to choices Noah had long ago accepted. The simplified story, ambitious young woman chooses career over relationship with unprepared partner, had been easier to process than this messier reality of pride, miscommunication, and regret. Noah closed the email and sat in silence, unsure how to proceed. Should he share this new information with Thomas? Would it merely reopen old wounds to no purpose? Or did Thomas deserve to know the complete truth about a pivotal moment in his life? The sound of Thomas's car in the driveway interrupted Noah's thoughts. He quickly closed his laptop as Thomas entered, carrying a stack of papers to grade and a small box that looked like it came from the local bakery. "I thought we might have dessert with dinner," Thomas explained, placing the box on the counter. "The students had a bake sale for the math club, and I may have overindulged." Noah forced a smile, trying to project normalcy while his mind raced with the implications of what he'd just learned. "Sounds great. How was your day?" "Productive," Thomas replied, studying Noah's expression with sudden concern. "Is everything all right? You seem distracted." The direct question created an immediate dilemma. Noah had never lied to Thomas, and the idea of starting now felt wrong. Yet blurting out the contents of Claire's letter without consideration seemed equally problematic. "I heard from my mother's lawyer this morning," Noah said finally, choosing a middle path. "There were some final matters regarding her estate." "I see," Thomas said, clearly sensing there was more to the story but respectful enough not to press. "If there's anything I can help with?" "Actually," Noah began, then hesitated. "There is something we should discuss, but I need a little time to process it first. Would that be okay?" Thomas nodded, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. "Of course, whenever you're ready." The evening unfolded with unusual tension. Their typically comfortable silences now weighted with unspoken words. They prepared dinner together as usual, discussed Thomas's classes and Noah's business plans, but an undercurrent of anticipation ran beneath the mundane conversation. After dinner, Noah retreated to the guest room, ostensibly to work, but actually to reread his mother's letter and consider his options. While Thomas watched the evening news downstairs, Noah could hear the occasional creak of floorboards as his father moved about the house, the domestic sounds now familiar after weeks of cohabitation. Close to midnight, Noah made his decision. He found Thomas in his study, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed student essays. "Do you have a moment?" Noah asked from the doorway. Thomas immediately set aside his work. "Of course." Noah entered and handed Thomas his laptop, open to Claire's scanned letter. "My mother's attorney sent this today. I think you should read." Thomas accepted the computer with visible apprehension. Noah watched as his father's expression changed while reading. Surprise, recognition, a fleeting wince of old pain, and finally a profound stillness that seemed to reflect deep thought. When Thomas finished reading, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture Noah had come to recognize as his way of collecting himself. "Thank you for sharing this with me," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. "I thought you deserved to know," Noah replied. "It changes some things about how I've understood what happens next," Noah said as they followed the tree-lined path that led toward town. "My leave of absence ends next week." Thomas nodded, his expression carefully neutral despite the slight tightening around his eyes. "Of course, you have a life in Seattle, work responsibilities." "I do," Noah agreed, "but I'm also at a professional crossroads. The firm I work for is merging with a larger company. Many of us are considering other options." They walked in silence for several moments, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. "The idea we discussed," Thomas ventured finally, "about using part of the account as seed money for your own architectural practice. Have you given it more thought?" "I have," Noah admitted. "I've been sketching preliminary business plans, researching potential markets." He hesitated before adding, "including locations in New England." Thomas stopped walking, his surprise evident. "You're considering relocating?" "I'm considering possibilities," Noah clarified. "Seattle has always been home, but lately I've been questioning whether that's by choice or by circumstance." The implications hung between them, the potential restructuring of two lives that had existed separately for 25 years, now contemplating a shared future. "Whatever you decide," Thomas said carefully, "the money is yours to use as you see fit, no expectations attached." Noah studied his father's face, recognizing the deliberate neutrality that masked deeper emotions. "But you have hopes," he observed. Thomas resumed walking, his pace slightly slower. "I find myself in an unexpected position," he admitted. "For 25 years I saved for a child I sensed but didn't know. Now that child is a grown man with his own established life, his own priorities. I'm trying to respect that reality while acknowledging that yes, I do hope for more time to know you." The honesty of this statement touched Noah deeply. "I appreciate that," he said, "and I'm not making any decisions lightly." They continued toward town, the conversation shifting to more immediate plans. Dinner with Susan and her husband the day following evening, a visit to the local architectural landmark Noah had expressed interest in, practical matters of daily living. At the town center, they passed Preston's Savings and Loan, where Thomas had faithfully deposited his monthly contributions for a quarter century. Noah paused, looking at the modest brick building with new appreciation. 25 years of sacrifice," he murmured. Thomas shook his head. "I never saw it as sacrifice," he said simply. "It felt necessary, like breathing." This perspective, so different from how Noah had framed Thomas's actions in his own mind, struck him forcefully. What if the years of saving weren't sacrifice but connection? What if the account wasn't merely money, but a form of communication across time and distance? That evening, after Thomas had retired to his study to prepare lesson plans, Noah sat, alone in the guest room that had begun to feel less temporary. On his laptop, he opened the business plan he'd been developing, draft sketches for a small architectural firm specializing in sustainable community spaces, financial projections, potential client bases. He toggled between two versions of the document, one based in Seattle, the other exploring the possibility of establishing his practice in Boston. close enough to Preston for regular visits yet within a vibrant urban market that could support his professional ambitions. The Boston option had started as a courtesy to Thomas, an acknowledgement of their newfound connection. But as Noah developed it further, he found himself increasingly drawn to its possibilities, not just professionally, but personally. His phone chimed with a text from Eliza, his closest friend in Seattle who had been his primary confidant throughout this journey. "How's it going with Math, Dad?" Her message read, using the nickname she'd coined after Noah's first phone call with Thomas. Noah started typing a response, then paused, realizing he needed to articulate something he hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "I feel like I've been orbiting an empty space my whole life," he wrote finally, and suddenly discovered what was supposed to fill it. Eliza's response came quickly. "That sounds significant. Are you thinking of staying longer?" Noah glanced at the dual business plans on his screen, the Seattle skyline he'd known his entire life versus the unfamiliar terrain of New England. "I'm thinking about a lot of things," he replied. After setting aside his phone, Noah reached for the stack of his mother's letters. He selected one dated shortly after his 18th birthday, one of the last she had written. "I wonder now if I made the right choice all those years ago," Claire had written to Thomas. "Noah graduates next month, and as I watch him prepare to enter the world as an adult, I see so much of sunroom less appealing. There's one from when I was 10 that I thought you might want to see." He handed Thomas an envelope containing a single sheet of pale blue stationery covered in Claire's distinctive handwriting. Thomas accepted it carefully, as if it might disintegrate at his touch. "Noah built a model bridge for his science project today," Thomas read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "The teacher called it remarkably sophisticated for a fifth grader. I watched him working on it for weeks, planning, measuring, testing materials. He has your mathematical precision, Thomas, combined with something else, a creative intuition that reminds me of myself at his age." Thomas looked up. "She saw both of us in you." Noah nodded. "She wrote to you often when I was younger. The letters became less frequent as I got older, but she never stopped completely." "Why didn't she send them?" Thomas asked, a question that had hovered unspoken between them. "Fear, I think, and pride." Noah shifted in his seat. In her journal, she wrote that the longer she waited, the harder it became to justify her initial decision to leave without telling you. Thomas carefully refolded the letter, returning it to its envelope. "I've been thinking about what I would have done had I known about you then." "Would you have tried to find us?" Noah asked, the question revealing his own long-held wonderings. "Without hesitation," Thomas replied. The simplicity of his answer hung in the air between them, an alternate timeline neither could fully imagine. The doorbell interrupted the moment. Thomas glanced at his watch, puzzled. "I'm not expecting anyone." He returned moments later accompanied by Susan, her hair damp from the rain, carrying a large cardboard box. "I was cleaning out Mom and Dad's storage items," she explained, setting the box on the coffee table. "I found some things I thought might interest both of you." Noah moved to help her unpack the box, which contained photo albums, notebooks, and several small objects wrapped in tissue paper. "These are from when Tom was around your age," Susan explained, opening an album to reveal photographs of a much younger Thomas. His features sharper, his hair darker, but unmistakably the same thoughtful eyes and slight furrow between his brows. "You played baseball?" Noah asked, pointing to a picture of Thomas in a university team uniform. "Briefly," Thomas admitted. "I wasn't particularly good, but I enjoyed the mathematical aspects of the game. The statistics, the angles, the probabilities." Susan laughed. He would calculate the optimal batting stance based on wind resistance and the pitcher's throwing. Angles. The coach thought he was either a genius or insane. They continued through the albums, building a visual timeline of Thomas's life before and after Claire, his graduation, early teaching positions, holidays with his parents, sabbatical, trips to mathematical conferences. "You look sad here," Noah observed, pointing to a photograph taken when Thomas would have been in his mid-30s. In it, Thomas stood beside a Christmas tree in Susan's home, his smile not reaching his eyes. "That was the year after I opened the account," Thomas said quietly. "I was still trying to make sense of what I was feeling, this persistent notion that something was missing." Susan unwrapped one of the tissue-covered objects, revealing a small wooden box with intricate geometric patterns inlaid on its surface. "Tom made this in his woodworking phase," she explained, handing it to Noah. "He's always been good with his hands." Noah examined the box with professional appreciation. "This is beautiful craftsmanship. The golden ratio is incorporated into the design." Thomas looked surprised. "You recognize that?" "I use the same principles in my architectural work," Noah replied. "Sacred geometry, as my mother called it. The mathematics that underlie beauty and design." The parallels between them continued to emerge throughout the afternoon. Shared preferences, similar mannerisms, identical approaches to problem solving. Susan watched their interactions with growing acceptance, the initial shock of Noah's existence giving way to recognition of the undeniable connection between her brother and his son. "I have something else," Susan said finally, reaching into her purse. "I wasn't sure whether to share this, but..." She withdrew a faded photograph and handed it to Thomas. "This was taken at that faculty dinner at the community college, the one where you first met Claire." The photograph showed a younger Thomas and Claire standing near a refreshment table, clearly engaged in animated conversation. Thomas's expression was one of rapt attention. Claire's hands were raised mid-gesture, her face alight with enthusiasm. "I'd forgotten this existed," Thomas said softly. "I never had any pictures of her." He passed the photograph to Noah, who studied it intently. "I have albums full of Mom, but very few from this period of her life. She didn't talk much about her time before Seattle." The three of them sat surrounded by these fragments of intersecting pasts, photographs, letters, handcrafted objects, each item bridging the years of separation with tangible evidence of shared history and inherited traits. As evening approached, Susan prepared to leave. At the door, she embraced Noah briefly but warmly. "It's strange," she said, "but I keep having the feeling that I've known you much longer than 10 days. After she departed, Thomas and Noah returned to the living room, where the remnants of their exploration remained scattered across the coffee table. "Would you like to see where I keep the bank statements?" Thomas asked suddenly. "The records of the account?" Noah nodded, curious about this aspect of Thomas's disciplined commitment. Thomas led him to his study and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were 25 folders, each labeled with a year, containing monthly statements meticulously organized in chronological order. "I recorded every deposit," Thomas explained, opening one of the folders. "Calculated compound interest projections, tracked market fluctuations." Noah examined the neat columns of figures, the precise notations in Thomas's handwriting. "You really never missed a month." "No." Thomas closed the folder. "Even when it made no logical sense, even when..." He paused, seemingly embarrassed by the emotion in his voice. "Even when what?" Noah prompted gently. "Even when I questioned my own sanity," Thomas finished. "There were times, especially in the early years, when I wondered if I was deluding myself, constructing an elaborate fantasy to cope with Claire's departure." The vulnerability in this admission touched Noah deeply. "Yet you kept saving." "I kept saving," Thomas agreed. "Because, despite all logical arguments against it, the feeling never went away. If anything, it grew stronger as the years passed." Noah thought about the parallel tracks their lives had followed. Thomas teaching mathematics while sensing a connection to an unknown child. Noah studying architecture while always feeling a strange absence where a father should have been. "Mom used to say that some bonds transcend physical proximity," Noah said quietly. "I thought it was just her new age philosophy, but now I wonder." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Mathematics teaches us that some patterns exist whether we perceive them or not. Perhaps human connections operate on similar principles. They spent the evening sorting through the remaining contents of Susan's box, exchanging stories, and gradually building a shared narrative from their separate experiences. Their first genuine collaboration as father and son. Thomas stood before his advanced placement calculus class, explaining the nuances of differential equations with the practiced ease of a veteran teacher. 2 weeks had passed since Noah's arrival, and today marked the first time Noah had accepted Thomas's invitation to observe his class. From the back row, Noah watched his father transform abstract mathematical concepts into accessible ideas, guiding his students with patient clarity. Mathematics isn't merely about finding answers, Thomas was saying, but about understanding the journey from question to solution. The path often reveals more than the destination. Noah found himself nodding in agreement, recognizing a philosophy that mirrored his own approach to architectural design. As the class progressed, he observed the obvious respect Thomas's students held for him, their attentiveness, their thoughtful questions, the way several lingered after the bell to continue discussions. "Your father's quite the celebrity around here," commented a woman who introduced herself as Elena Jordan, the school's art teacher, as students filtered out. 28 years, and he still manages to make calculus sound like poetry. "I'm beginning to see that," Noah replied. The term, "your father," still new enough to cause a slight hesitation. Once the last student departed, Thomas approached, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "Well, was it terribly boring?" "Not at all," Noah assured him. "You're a gifted teacher. I wish my calculus professor had been half as engaging." Relief softened Thomas's features. "Most people find mathematics tedious. I've always seen it as the underlying language of the universe. Elegant, precise, revealing." "That's how Mom described architecture," Noah noted as they walked through the school corridors toward the exit. "A tangible expression of mathematical truths." Thomas smiled at this connection. Claire always did see the poetry in numbers. Outside, autumn had painted the school grounds in brilliant oranges and reds. They decided to walk home rather than drive, taking advantage of the clear afternoon. "I've been thinking about..." Help temper her reaction. The restaurant was a small Italian place in downtown Preston. Susan Mercer Davidson was already seated when they arrived, her attention focused on her phone. She looked up as they approached, and Noah immediately recognized the family resemblance, the same thoughtful eyes, though hers were framed by stylish glasses and surrounded by laugh lines. "Tom, right on time as always," she said, rising to greet her brother. Her curious gaze shifted to Noah. "And you must be..." "Noah Winters," he supplied, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you, Susan." They settled into their seats, ordered drinks, and navigated small talk until their server departed with their lunch orders. Then Susan fixed her brother with a penetrating look. "All right, Tom. I've known you my entire life, and you've never once brought a friend to our monthly lunch. What's going on?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Susan, Noah is my son." The directness of the statement, no preamble, no softening, was characteristic of Thomas but still caught Noah by surprise. Susan's eyes widened, darting between them with obvious shock. "Your son," she repeated. "How is that possible? I would have known if you had a child." "I didn't know myself until recently," Thomas replied, then proceeded to explain the situation with Claire, the letter from Noah, and most difficult of all, the 25 years of saving. As the story unfolded, Susan's expression shifted, from shock to disbelief to something approaching anger. "You've been putting away money for 25 years for a child you didn't know existed?" she asked incredulously. "Tom, that's weird, irrational, believe me, I'm aware," Thomas said with unusual emotion. "But it happened, Susan. And now Noah is here and we're trying to figure out what that means." Susan turned to Noah, studying him with new intensity. "You look like him," she said finally, "especially around the eyes and jawline, though I see someone else there too." "My mother," Noah confirmed. "Claire Winters." Recognition flickered across Susan's face. The architect. You dated her briefly when you were teaching at the community college. She turned back to Thomas. I remember her. You were devastated when she left. Thomas nodded, seemingly surprised by his sister's memory. Yes. And now you're just accepting this young man into your life? Giving him access to money you've saved for decades? Tom, have you even considered a paternity test? Susan. Thomas began, but Noah interrupted. It's a reasonable question, he said calmly, and one I anticipated. I've already arranged for testing, for both our peace of mind. But Thomas doesn't need the results to know what he's felt for 25 years. Susan's directness softened slightly. I'm just concerned. This is all happening very quickly. Some things can't be explained by logic or conventional timelines, Thomas said quietly. You know, I've always lived simply, saved carefully. Now you know why. Their server returned with their meals, creating a momentary reprieve from the tension. As they began eating, Susan addressed Noah directly. So, what do you do, Noah? I'm an architect like my mother was. A smile tugged at Susan's lips despite her obvious reservations. Of course you are. The universe does enjoy its patterns, doesn't it? As lunch progressed, the conversation gradually eased into more comfortable territory. Noah shared stories about growing up in Seattle, his education, his professional aspirations. Susan revealed anecdotes about Thomas as a young man, painting a picture of the person he had been before the weight of intuition had shaped his life. By dessert, something had shifted. Susan's initial skepticism hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had made room for the possibility that her brother's inexplicable quarter-century of saving might have been guided by something beyond rational understanding. As they prepared to leave, Susan pulled Noah aside while Thomas paid the bill. My brother is the most rational, methodical person I know, she said quietly. For him to have done what he did for 25 years, it defies everything I thought I understood about him. And about the world. Noah nodded. I'm still processing it myself. Be careful with him, Susan added. This means more to him than you can possibly imagine. Noah watched Thomas approach, this man who had sensed his existence across an impossible distance. I know, he replied. It means more to me too. Saturday dawned with a gentle rain that drummed against the windows of Thomas's home. 10 days into Noah's stay, their morning routine had evolved to accommodate each other's habits. Thomas prepared coffee while Noah toasted bread and sliced fruit, moving around the kitchen with a synchronicity that belied their short acquaintance. I've been reading Mom's letters, Noah said as they settled in the living room, the rain making the man. This mathematics teacher with his precise handwriting and early rising habits had been connected to Noah through some inexplicable thread for 25 years. The realization was both overwhelming and strangely comforting. Noah set down the folder and picked up one of the framed photographs on the side table. Thomas receiving a teaching award, surrounded by smiling students. Another showed him standing beside a woman who shared his eyes. A sister, perhaps. A life lived quietly, carefully, with unacknowledged sacrifice at its core. A life that had, in some mysterious way, always included Noah, even in absence. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. As Thomas returned to the sunroom, Noah realized he was seeing not just his biological father, but a man who had faithfully kept a promise to a child he didn't know existed. The money wasn't simply savings. It was evidence of a connection that transcended knowledge, that existed in some deeper realm of human understanding. And now they had the chance to transform this connection into something tangible, something shared. This is where I work, Thomas said, gesturing toward Preston High School as they drove past the red brick building on Friday morning. 5 days into Noah's visit, they had settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Morning coffee in the sunroom, quiet conversation over simple meals, and gradual exploration of each other's lives. Nothing glamorous, but it's been home for nearly 30 years. Noah studied the traditional New England architecture with professional interest. "I designed a high school in Portland last year," he mentioned. "Much more modern than this, but there's something appealing about the classical structure. Perhaps you could visit my classroom sometime," Thomas suggested, then immediately backtracked. "Though I'm sure you have better things to do than watch. A math teacher at work." "Actually, I'd like that," Noah replied. His tentative one-week visit had already expanded to 2, with vague discussions about extending further. Each day brought new discoveries about the father he'd never known, and about himself in reflection. They continued their drive toward the bank, where Thomas had scheduled an appointment to discuss the savings account that had become the tangible representation of their unexpected connection. The decision to possibly use part of the fund as investment capital for Noah's architectural firm remained tentative, wrapped in complex emotions neither man had fully articulated. "I should warn you about Susan," Thomas said as they parked. "My sister can be rather direct. She's joining us for lunch after the bank meeting." "The sister who doesn't know about me yet," Noah noted with a raised eyebrow. Thomas sighed. "I've been trying to find the right words. Hello, Susan. Meet the nephew you never knew existed because I've been saving money for 25 years. Based on a feeling I couldn't explain, doesn't quite roll off the tongue." The unexpected humor from his typically reserved father made Noah laugh. "Fair enough. We'll tackle that bridge when we come to it." Inside the bank, Mr. Fellows, a middle-aged manager who had overseen Thomas's account for years, greeted them with professional courtesy that quickly turned to confusion as Thomas explained the situation in his straightforward manner. "So you're looking to add Mr. Winters as a joint account holder?" Fellows clarified, glancing between them. "Initially, yes," Thomas replied. "Eventually, we'll likely transfer the funds entirely to Noah's name, or possibly convert some portion into investment capital for a business venture." Fellows examined his computer screen. "I see this account was established as an education fund. Is that still its designated purpose?" Thomas and Noah exchanged glances. "The purpose has evolved," Thomas said carefully. As they worked through the paperwork, Noah felt the weight of what was happening. This wasn't simply a financial transaction, it was formal acknowledgement of a relationship that had existed only in Thomas's intuition for 25 years. "I'll need both signatures here," Fellows said, sliding a document across the desk. "This establishes legal joint ownership of the assets." As Noah signed his name below Thomas's precise script, he noticed his hand trembling slightly. 25 years of Thomas's life, his sacrifices, his discipline, condensed into a legal form and the flowing ink of a signature. "Congratulations," Fellows said when they finished. "You now have joint access to the account." Outside, Thomas checked his watch. "We should head to the restaurant. Susan is pathologically punctual." "Should we perhaps have this meeting somewhere private?" Noah suggested. "Given what you'll be telling her." Thomas considered this. Susan appreciates directness. The public setting might actually awoke in an unfamiliar bed. For a moment, disorientation clouded his mind before the events of the previous day reassembled themselves. He was in Preston, New Hampshire, in the home of Thomas Mercer, his biological father. Downstairs, he could hear movement in the kitchen, the subtle domestic sounds of someone trying to be quiet but not entirely succeeding. Noah checked his phone. 6:45 a.m. Apparently, early rising was another trait he shared with Thomas, along with the stubborn cowlick at the crown of his head that he'd noticed when they stood side by side in the airport. The guest room was simple, but comfortable. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with an eclectic collection that suggested the room doubled as a secondary library. Noah ran his fingers along the spines: biographies, historical novels, mathematics textbooks, and surprisingly, several volumes on architecture, his mother's profession and coincidentally his own. On the nightstand lay the bundle of his mother's unsent letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. He had read them countless times since discovering them among her belongings, trying to understand the choices that had shaped his life. Now they were here, in the home of the man they had been written to but never reached. After dressing, Noah made his way downstairs. He found Thomas in the sunroom, 2 mugs of coffee on the small table and a plate of toast between them. "I hope I didn't wake you," Thomas said, looking up from his newspaper. "I'm afraid I'm incapable of sleeping past 6:30, even on weekends." "Same," Noah replied, accepting the offered coffee. "It drove my college roommates crazy." A small smile tugged at the corner of Thomas's mouth, recognition of another shared trait. "I thought we might talk about the account today," he said after a moment, "if you feel ready for that conversation." Noah nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "I still can't quite believe it. You saved for 25 years for a child you didn't know existed." "I can barely explain it myself," Thomas admitted. "After your mother left, I had these dreams, persistent, vivid dreams about a child. I would wake up absolutely certain I needed to provide for someone." He shook his head slightly. "It sounds irrational, I know." "My mother would have called it quantum entanglement of the soul," Noah said with a soft laugh. She had some rather New Age beliefs alongside her practical architectural mind. Thomas's expression softened at this glimpse of Claire. "That sounds like her. She used to say mathematics was just another way of describing the mystical." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts of the woman who connected them. "The account," Thomas continued finally, "started as a small thing, $1,000 on my 33rd birthday, but it became a discipline, almost a ritual, 15% of every paycheck without fail." "Even when it was difficult," Thomas nodded. "There were times when my parents needed care before they passed, when I needed a new roof. But something always stopped me from touching that money. It felt designated somehow." He rose and retrieved a folder from his desk in the adjacent room. "I brought the statements. The total is $328,647.19 now." He handed the folder to Noah. "It's yours." Noah stared at the folder without opening it. "I can't accept this," he said automatically. "It's always been yours," Thomas replied simply. "I just didn't know your name until now." "But you worked for this money. You sacrificed for it." "I saved it for my child." Thomas's voice was firm. "That's you, Noah." Noah finally opened the folder, scanning the most recent statement with architectural eyes that noticed patterns, progression. "You never touched it. Not once in 25 years." "No." The weight of this dedication settled between them. 25 years of disciplined saving, of modest living, of unwavering commitment to an intuition that defied logic. "I don't need this money," Noah said finally. "I have a good job, savings of my own." "Nevertheless, it belongs to you," Thomas insisted. "Perhaps not to spend immediately, but to have, to know it exists." Noah closed the folder, his mind working through possibilities. "What if," he began slowly, "we used part of it together? I've been thinking about starting my own small architectural firm, focusing on sustainable community spaces. This could be, I don't know, seed money, an investment. We share." The suggestion hung in the air, tentative yet filled with possibility, a future neither man had anticipated 2 weeks ago. Thomas's eyes brightened. "I'd like that very much." The moment was interrupted by Thomas's phone ringing. He excused himself to answer it, leaving Noah alone with the folder and its implications. In the kitchen, Noah could hear Thomas's voice, professional, measured, as he spoke with a colleague about Monday's faculty meeting. This handwriting. The 12 days since receiving Noah's letter had passed in a blur of email exchanges, one tentative phone call, and hasty travel arrangements. "I understand if this is too much, too soon," Noah had written in his 3rd email. "But I've taken a leave of absence from work. I could visit if you're open to it." Thomas had surprised himself with his immediate response. "I would like that very much." Now, waiting in the airport, doubt crept in. What did one say to a 25-year-old son you'd never met? What expectations did Noah bring with him? And how would Thomas explain the account? the money he'd been saving without any rational explanation. Passengers streamed through the gate, reuniting with waiting family members, embracing, laughing. Thomas scanned each face, wondering how he would recognize a young man he had never seen before. And then suddenly, there he was, unmistakable even without prior knowledge. Noah Winters had Thomas's height, his angular jawline, and most startlingly, the same slight furrow between his brows that Thomas saw every morning in the mirror. The young man wore dark jeans and a gray sweater, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and his eyes, Claire's eyes, moved searchingly across the waiting crowd. When those eyes found Thomas and the sign he held, Noah paused. For one suspended moment, father and son regarded each other across the terminal floor. 25 years of separation crystallized in a single gaze. Thomas didn't remember moving, but suddenly they stood face to face, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in Noah's brown eyes, another feature inherited from Claire. "Mr. Mercer?" Noah's voice was deeper than it had sounded on their brief phone call. "Thomas, please." He extended his hand formally, then felt immediately foolish for the gesture. "It's good to meet you, Noah." Noah shifted his backpack and accepted the handshake. His grip was firm, his palm slightly calloused. "This is strange, isn't it? I've rehearsed this moment for days, and now I can't remember anything I planned to say." The honesty broke through some of the tension. Thomas found himself smiling. "I've been doing the same. Perhaps we can be awkward together for a while." They collected Noah's suitcase and made their way to the parking garage in a silence punctuated by small talk about the flight and the unseasonably mild New England weather. In the car, Thomas noticed Noah studying his profile when he thought. Thomas wasn't aware. "You have questions," Thomas said as they merged onto the highway. Noah nodded. "Hundreds, but they all seem too big or too small." "Did you know about me?" The directness of the question caught Thomas off guard. "No," he answered honestly. "Your mother left without telling me she was pregnant. I had no idea you existed, at least, not consciously." "What does that mean?" "Not consciously?" Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "It's difficult to explain. After your mother left, I had this feeling, a persistent intuition that there was someone I needed to provide for. It never went away." He glanced at Noah, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "I know that sounds strange." "My mother kept a journal," Noah said after a moment. "In it, she wrote that she left because she believed you weren't ready for fatherhood, and she wasn't willing to sacrifice her career aspirations. She was offered a position in Seattle, her dream job in architectural design." Thomas absorbed this with a nod. "Claire was extraordinarily talented. I remember her sketches, her models. She had a brilliant mind for spatial relationships. She never married," Noah continued. "She dated occasionally, but it never lasted. In her journal, she wrote that she regretted not telling you about me, especially as I got older. The unsent letters to you spanned years. The last one was written just weeks before she died." They drove in silence for several miles, the implications of Claire's choices and Thomas's unknowing response hanging between them. "I brought them, the letters," Noah said finally. "She never mailed them, but I think she would want you to read them now." Thomas swallowed hard against the tightness in his throat. "I'd like that." As they turned onto the maple-lined street leading to Thomas's home, Noah straightened in his seat. "Can I ask you something else?" "Of course." "This feeling, what did you do with it? This intuition about someone you needed to provide for?" Thomas turned into his driveway, put the car in park, and turned to face his son fully for the first time. "I opened a savings account," he said simply. 25 years ago. I've been putting away 15% of every paycheck since then." Noah's eyes widened slightly. "For what purpose?" "For you," Thomas replied, "though I didn't know it was you until 12 days ago." Morning light streamed through the guest room window as Noah, that his decades of inexplicable intuition, his years of quiet financial sacrifice had not been madness after all. For 25 years, Thomas Mercer had saved for a son he never knew existed. And now, that son had found him. Saturday mornings followed their own ritual in Thomas's life. He would wake precisely at 6:30 a.m., brew a pot of dark roast coffee, and take his first cup to the small sunroom at the back of his house. There, surrounded by potted ferns in the morning light, he would complete the newspaper's crossword puzzle before preparing a simple breakfast of toast and eggs. This Saturday, however, the crossword remained untouched. The coffee grew cold, and Thomas sat staring at Noah Winter's letter for the 100th time since its arrival. The bank statement on the table beside him represented 25 years of disciplined saving, a secret even from himself in some ways. The Winters Education Fund, he had named it when opening the account all those years ago. The irony of the surname coincidence was not lost on him now. Thomas had never been able to explain even to himself why he'd started the account. After Claire disappeared, he had experienced dreams so vivid they felt like visitations, dreams of a child he needed to protect, to provide for. At first, he dismissed them as his subconscious processing the abrupt end of their relationship. But when the dreams persisted month after month, he had walked into Preston's Savings and Loan on his 33rd birthday and opened the account with $1,000, nearly his entire savings at the time. Every month since, without fail, 15% of his teacher's salary went into that account. His colleagues often teased him about his ancient Toyota Corolla, his reluctance to join them for expensive dinners, his modest vacations spent hiking, local trails rather than visiting exotic destinations. Just saving for the future, he would say with a shrug, never specifying what future he was preparing for. The total now stood at $328,647.19, a substantial sum built from the modest salary of a public school teacher who lived well below his means. Thomas had never touched the money, never been tempted to dip into it even during the roof replacement 5 years ago, or when his sister had needed help with medical bills. Something had always stopped him, some unnameable certainty that this money had a designated purpose. His small house told the story of his priorities. The furniture was well maintained but dated, chosen for durability rather than style. His television was an older model, his computer adequate but basic. The one area where Thomas didn't economize was his small but carefully curated library. Shelves of classics, biographies, and mathematics texts lined his study walls. He had dated occasionally over the years, but relationships inevitably faltered. When women sensed his emotional and financial reservations, his last serious relationship had ended 4 years ago, when Catherine, a kind-hearted librarian who shared his love of biographies, had gently suggested they should discuss their future. "There's a part of you that's never fully present, Thomas," she had said. "You're waiting for something and I don't think it's me." She had been right, though Thomas couldn't have articulated what he was waiting for until yesterday's letter arrived. The letter rested in his hands now, its implications rippling through every aspect of his carefully constructed life. Noah Winters was 25 years old, according to the birth date mentioned in his letter. 25 years of Thomas saving for a son whose existence he had somehow sensed but never confirmed. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Susan, his younger sister and only family since their parents had passed. "You still coming for dinner tomorrow?" she asked after they exchanged greetings. "Yes, of course," Thomas replied automatically, though he had completely forgotten their standing monthly dinner. "Tom, are you all right? You sound strange." Thomas glanced down at the letter. "I'm fine, just grading some challenging papers." The lie came easily, his first to Susan in years. But how could he explain something he barely understood himself? That for 25 years he had been saving for a son he never knew existed. That his seemingly rational, methodical life had been guided by an intuition he couldn't explain. After hanging up, Thomas returned to the sunroom and finally picked up his pen. He began writing a reply to Noah Winters, the son who had existed in some corner of his consciousness for a quarter century. The son who was no longer just a feeling, but a reality waiting to be discovered. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of a Tuesday afternoon. Thomas stood rigidly by the arrivals gate, his hands clasped tightly around a small sign bearing the name Noah Winters in his precise. Have you ever felt a connection to someone you've never met? A pull so strong that it shapes your daily decisions, influences your life's path, even though there's no logical explanation for it. For Thomas Mercer, this wasn't just a passing thought, it was a silent commitment that spanned 25 years of his ordinary life as a high school math teacher. Every payday, without fail, he would walk to the bank and deposit exactly 15% of his salary into an account with no designated purpose, except for a feeling that somewhere out there, someone might need it someday. His colleagues bought new cars, his friends took exotic vacations, but Thomas lived simply, guarding a secret that even he couldn't fully explain. It's just responsible saving, he'd tell anyone who noticed his frugal lifestyle. But as retirement approached and the account grew to over $320,000, even Thomas wondered if his decades of sacrifice had been nothing more than a fool's errand, until a letter arrived with an unfamiliar postmark and handwriting that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his solitary existence. The son he never knew existed was about to walk into his life, bringing with him questions that had shaped both their lives from opposite ends of an invisible thread that had connected them all along. The autumn light filtered through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across empty desks as Thomas Mercer erased complex equations from the whiteboard. Friday afternoon quiet had settled over Preston High School, and Thomas welcomed the familiar transition into weekend solitude. 28 years of teaching mathematics had given his movements a rhythmic precision: erase, clean, organize, depart, a pattern as predictable as the numerical sequences he taught his students. At 58, Thomas had become something of an institution at Preston High. His silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses were as much a part of the school landscape as the trophy cabinet or the ancient oak tree in the courtyard. Students respected him for his clarity and patience. Colleagues appreciated his reliability and unobtrusive presence. "Got big plans this weekend, Tom?" Principal Harris asked, popping his head into the classroom. Thomas offered a practiced smile. "The usual. Some reading, maybe work on that cabinet I've been refinishing." Harris nodded, accustomed to Thomas's modest weekend reports. "Well, don't work too hard. The Henderson College recommendation can wait until Monday." "Already finished," Thomas replied, tapping a folder on his desk. "I'll drop it in your mailbox on my way out." After Harris departed, Thomas gathered his belongings with methodical care. His worn leather messenger bag, a gift to himself on his 40th birthday, held the week's graded papers, his favorite fountain pen, and a dog-eared copy of a biography he'd been slowly working through. Nothing extraordinary, nothing revealing. The drive home followed the same route it always did, past the town library, right at the old fire station, left at the bakery whose cinnamon rolls were his one Friday indulgence. His modest Cape Cod-style house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees now blazing with October color. The mailbox at the end of his neatly maintained walkway was, as always, his final stop before entering his sanctuary. Bills, a magazine, subscription, a flyer for the upcoming Town Harvest Festival, and an envelope that immediately seemed out of place. Hand-addressed in unfamiliar handwriting, postmarked from Seattle, Washington. Thomas didn't know anyone in Seattle. Inside his house, he placed his bag in its designated spot by the desk, hung his jacket on the wooden peg by the door, and arranged his shoes on the mat, all before allowing himself to examine the mysterious envelope. Some routines provided comfort, others merely postponed the inevitable. The return address offered only a name: Noah Winters. The name meant nothing to him, yet something in Thomas's chest tightened as he carefully opened the envelope with a letter opener from his desk. "Dear Mr. Mercer," it began, "you don't know me, but my name is Noah Winters. I believe you knew. My mother, Claire Winters, 25 years ago. The mug of tea Thomas had just prepared slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Tea splashed across his socks, but he didn't move. Claire Winters. A name he had forced himself not to think about for decades, yet had never truly forgotten. My mother passed away last month after a long battle with cancer, the letter continued. While going through her belongings, I discovered several unsent letters addressed to you, along with a journal that suggests something I've wondered about my entire life. I believe you may be my father. Thomas sank into his armchair, the broken ceramic and spilled tea forgotten. His hands trembled as they held the letter. Evidence. Both parents. Perfect timing, Thomas observed with a smile. A fitting conclusion to a year of unexpected beginnings. As they said goodnight, the snow had begun falling again, adding fresh layers to the existing blanket that covered Preston's streets and sidewalks. Thomas paused on the porch, looking back at Noah standing in the doorway of the blue-shuttered house. His son, now established in a home just minutes from Thomas's own, building a life that somehow integrated their separate pasts into shared present and future. The transformation was complete yet ongoing, a process rather than a destination, a journey of continual discovery rather than a finite transition. Like the snow transforming the familiar landscape into something simultaneously different yet recognizable, their lives had been fundamentally altered, yet remained essentially themselves, changed not by erasure, but by addition, by the incorporation of connection into previously separate existences. Spring arrived in Preston, with characteristic New England capriciousness. Warm, sunny days interspersed with sudden, chilling rains, the landscape gradually shifting from winter's monochrome to vibrant greens and early blossoms. 1 year had passed since Noah's first letter had arrived in Thomas's mailbox, initiating the journey that had transformed both their lives. The anniversary found them in Thomas's sunroom, reviewing applications for the inaugural Thomas Mercer and Claire Winters Scholarship. The foundation committee had narrowed the field to 5 finalists, leaving the final selection to Thomas as advisory chair, with Noah's input welcomed but not required by the official process. "What do you think of the Martinez submission?" Thomas asked, passing the folder to Noah. "Mathematically gifted, but there's also remarkable spatial awareness in her design portfolio." Noah reviewed the application with professional interest. "Her architectural concepts show intuitive understanding of proportion and balance. She's integrating mathematical principles with artistic expression, exactly what the scholarship criteria emphasize." The process of selecting the first recipient had unexpected emotional resonance for both men. Each application represented a young person at a pivotal moment, seniors preparing to leave Preston for college, embarking on educational journeys that would shape their future paths. The parallels to Noah's own journey at that age, and the profound differences created by Claire's decision, were impossible to ignore. "I keep thinking about how things might have been different," Noah admitted, setting aside the Martinez application. "If Mom had made a different choice, I might have been a Preston High graduate myself. You might have been my mathematics teacher." Thomas considered this alternative timeline thoughtfully. "I've had similar reflections," he acknowledged, "but increasingly I find myself accepting what actually happened rather than wondering about what might have been." This perspective, focusing on actual experience rather than hypothetical alternatives, reflected significant emotional evolution for both men. The initial pain of discovering 25 years of unnecessary separation had gradually transformed into appreciation for the unique connection they had developed despite that separation. "I agree," Noah said after a moment. "The path was complicated, but it led us here. That's what matters now." The conversation shifted to practical matters: Noah's growing architectural practice in Newton, Thomas's upcoming retirement announcement, shared summer plans for a driving tour of New England architectural landmarks. Their lives had developed an intertwined rhythm that accommodated both individual pursuits and regular connection. As they concluded their scholarship review, selecting Elena Martinez as the inaugural recipient, Thomas raised a topic that had been gradually emerging in their conversations over recent months. "I've been considering my options after retirement," he said, carefully organizing the application materials into neat stacks. The house feels larger than necessary for one person, especially with you established in your own place. Noah looked up, attentive to the implication in Thomas's tone. Are you thinking of downsizing? Possibly, Thomas replied, or perhaps repurposing. I've been exploring the possibility of converting part of the ground floor into a small mathematical learning center. Supplementary education for students needing additional support or seeking advanced challenges beyond the standard curriculum. The concept immediately engaged Noah's architectural imagination. The sunroom would make an excellent small classroom space, he observed, glancing around. Natural light, garden views, separate entrance possibility through the side door. Thomas smiled, pleased by Noah's immediate understanding. Those were my thoughts exactly. The formal dining room I rarely use could become a study area, and with some minor modifications to the kitchen, you'd need proper accessibility accommodations, Noah noted, shifting into professional assessment mode. The front steps are problematic, and the powder room would require updating to meet code requirements for educational facilities. As they continued exploring the concept, Noah retrieved his tablet and began sketching preliminary floor plans. While Thomas outlined his educational philosophy and programming ideas, the collaborative exchange, Thomas's educational expertise integrated with Noah's architectural knowledge, represented their most natural interaction yet, each contributing from his area of professional mastery toward a shared vision. Would you consider designing the conversion? Thomas asked as their discussion progressed. Officially, I mean, as a commissioned project for your firm. I would pay standard professional rates, of course. The question created a moment of surprised silence before Noah responded. I'd be honored, he said finally, though I'd insist on family discount rates. The casual reference to family discount, Noah's easy acknowledgement of their relationship in a professional context, marked another milestone in their evolving connection. The separate spheres of family relationship and professional identity had begun to integrate organically, each informing and enhancing the other. Later that week, Thomas and Noah attended the Preston High Senior Awards ceremony, where Elena Martinez would receive formal notification of her scholarship. They sat together in the school auditorium, surrounded by proud parents and family members celebrating student achievements. When Principal Harris announced the inaugural Thomas Mercer and Claire Winters Scholarship, inviting both Thomas and Noah to join him on stage for the presentation, their public appearance as father and son generated subtle murmurs of interest among community members still adjusting to this relatively new relationship. Elena accepted the award with gracious enthusiasm, her brief speech acknowledging not just the financial support, but the philosophical foundation of the scholarship: integration of mathematical precision with creative vision, technical skill with artistic expression. I am honored to receive this award that celebrates the connection between seemingly different approaches to understanding our world, she concluded. Mathematics and art, precision and creativity, these aren't opposing forces, but complementary, perspectives that, when integrated, allow us to see more completely. The insight contained in this young woman's remarks resonated deeply with Thomas and Noah, echoing their own experience of integration, not just of mathematical and architectural perspectives, but of lives that had developed separately, yet somehow remained connected across time and distance. After the ceremony, as attendees gathered for refreshments in the school lobby, Thomas found himself repeatedly introduced as Noah Winters' father, a public identity that now existed alongside his established role as respected mathematics teacher. The dual recognition reflected the community's gradual incorporation of their story into the collective understanding of Preston's social fabric. That evening, Noah invited Thomas to dinner at the blue-shuttered house to continue their discussion about the learning center concept. As they worked on preliminary plans, Noah received a text message that prompted an unexpected smile. "Good news?" Thomas inquired, noting his son's expression. "Elena Martinez's mother," Noah explained. "She's asked if her daughter might intern." at my firm next summer before starting college. Apparently, Elena's scholarship application process sparked serious interest in architectural design. The connection between their newly established scholarship and Noah's professional practice represented another strand in the web of integrated purpose they were creating. Not separate achievements, but interrelated contributions to a shared community. As spring advanced toward summer, the concrete implementations of their relationship multiplied. Thomas's learning center design progressing from concept to detailed plans under Noah's professional guidance, Noah's architectural practice steadily growing through connections within the community Thomas had served for decades, their individual expertise increasingly shared and integrated. One warm June evening, Noah arrived at Thomas's house carrying a package carefully wrapped in brown paper. "This was delivered to my studio," he explained, setting it on the kitchen table. "The return address is Seattle, but I don't recognize the name." Thomas examined the package with curiosity. "Lawrence Fraser? Doesn't sound familiar to me either." Noah opened the accompanying letter first, his expression shifting from confusion to surprised recognition as he read. "It's from Mom's former colleague," he explained. "They worked together at the architectural firm in Seattle for almost 20 years. The letter explained that while helping clear out an old storage room at the firm, Lawrence had discovered a set of architectural models and drawings created by Claire Winters, but never submitted for any known project. Recognizing their quality and potential personal significance, he had tracked down Noah through professional directories to return these materials. Together, Thomas and Noah carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a series of intricately crafted architectural models and corresponding blueprints. The designs showed a community art center with distinctive elements, a mathematics-inspired geometric facade, classroom spaces arranged in Fibonacci sequence proportions, and a central atrium whose light patterns would shift throughout the day according to precisely calculated angles. "These are dated from 15 years ago," Noah noted, examining the blueprint's timestamps. "But they were never developed into actual proposals or submissions." Thomas studied the models with growing recognition. "The mathematical principles incorporated here are remarkably sophisticated," he observed. "These aren't just decorative elements, but fundamental structural concepts." As they continued examining the materials, Noah discovered a sealed envelope tucked within the blueprint roll, addressed simply, "For Noah and Thomas, if found." Inside was a handwritten letter. From Claire, dated shortly before her cancer diagnosis. "My dearest Noah," she had written, "these designs represent a project I've never shared with anyone. A vision that emerged over many years, but that I've kept private for reasons I'm only beginning to understand. The mathematical elements integrated throughout aren't merely aesthetic choices, but reflections of principles I first encountered through discussions with Thomas during our brief time together. I've come to recognize that my architectural vision has always been influenced by that relationship, however short-lived it appeared on the surface. Something in his mathematical perspective permanently altered how I perceive spatial relationships and structural harmony. If you're reading this, it likely means I've finally found the courage to share these designs, and perhaps the complete truth about your father. Or possibly events have unfolded differently, and you've discovered these materials after connecting with Thomas through other means. Either way, I want you to know that while physical distance and my own choices separated you from your father, a fundamental connection existed all along, expressed through my work, through your inherited talents, through patterns of thought and perception that transcend ordinary explanation. The Community Arts Center designed here was never submitted for development because it never felt complete, as if it were waiting for something or someone to fulfill its potential. Perhaps that someone is you, Noah. Or perhaps it's both of you together. The mathematical precision and architectural vision finally reunited, as they were always meant to be. Thomas and Noah sat in silence after reading Claire's words, absorbing their implications. The designs before them represented tangible evidence of connection that had persisted despite physical separation. Claire's architectural vision influenced by Thomas's mathematical perspective, Noah's inherited talents combining elements from both parents. "She never stopped thinking about you," Noah said finally. "These designs prove that. Your influence remained active in her work decades after your brief relationship ended." Thomas nodded, visibly moved by this unexpected insight into Claire's inner life. "And she clearly recognized the connection continuing through you," he added. "The integration of our separate perspectives in your inherited talents and professional approach." The arrival of Claire's designs created a profound moment of emotional resolution for both men. Confirmation that the mysterious connection they had sensed across years of separation had not been imagined, but real, manifesting in ways neither had fully understood until now. In the following weeks, Noah incorporated elements from Claire's designs into his own work on Thomas's Learning Center project. Subtle homages to his mother's architectural vision integrated with contemporary sustainable building practices. The project became a three-way collaboration across time: Thomas's educational philosophy, Claire's mathematical architecture, and Noah's synthesizing design approach. One afternoon in early July, as they reviewed the finalized Learning Center plans in Noah's Newton studio, Thomas brought up a subject that had been gradually forming in his thoughts. "I've been considering the fund," he said, referring to the original savings account that had initiated their connection. "After establishing the scholarship, there remains a substantial portion that hasn't been designated for specific purpose." Noah looked up from the blueprints spread across his work table. "What are you thinking?" "Perhaps a foundation," Thomas suggested. "Something more comprehensive than a single scholarship. An organization dedicated to supporting integration of mathematical education with creative disciplines. Workshops, collaborative projects between schools and arts organizations, resources for teachers and students exploring these connections." The concept immediately engaged Noah's interest. "A permanent institution rather than just a financial award," he elaborated. "Something that could grow beyond Preston, potentially regional, or even national in scope." As they developed this new vision, each contributing ideas from his professional perspective, the original purpose of Thomas's 25 years of saving underwent final transformation, from providing for an unknown child to establishing an enduring institution that would benefit countless young people, exploring connections between mathematical precision and creative expression. "The Mercer Winters Foundation for Integrated Education," Noah proposed, jotting notes as their concept developed. "We could establish a governing board including educators, architects, artists, mathematicians, diverse perspectives united by commitment to cross-disciplinary learning." The collaborative exchange flowed naturally between them, ideas building upon ideas, Thomas's educational expertise complemented by Noah's organizational vision. What had begun as one man's inexplicable impulse to save for an unknown child had evolved into shared purpose that would extend beyond their individual lifetimes. That evening, as they continued their discussion over dinner at the blue-shuttered house, Noah raised his glass. "To the foundation," he said, offering a toast, "and to 25 years of saving that found its ultimate purpose." Thomas raised his own glass in response. "To connection that transcended separation," he added, "and to Claire, whose vision continues through both of us." The moment represented emotional resolution of their extraordinary journey. Acknowledgement that the mysterious bond they had each felt across years of separation had been real and meaningful. That the pain of missed opportunities had been transmuted into purpose extending beyond themselves. That what appeared as loss had ultimately revealed itself as connection, operating on levels they were only beginning to understand. As summer progressed, practical implementations of their evolving relationship multiplied. Construction began on Thomas's Learning Center. The foundation concept developed from theoretical discussion to concrete planning, and Noah's architectural practice continued expanding through projects that increasingly integrated mathematical principles with design innovation. The emotional resolution they had reached didn't erase the complexity of their unique situation, or the occasional challenges of merging lives developed independently for decades. But it provided framework for understanding their connection, not as coincidence or psychological projection, but as manifestation of something genuine and significant, a bond that had existed beyond conscious awareness until circumstances allowed its recognition. In this resolution lay the true transformation of Thomas's 25 years of faithful saving, not merely financial provision for his unknown son, but creation of the conditions through which profound connection could eventually find expression in shared purpose and mutual understanding. October sunlight filtered through the newly installed skylights of the Newton studio, illuminating the expanded space where Noah's architectural practice had grown from solo venture to small but thriving firm. 18 months had passed since his arrival in New England, a period of steady professional development paralleled by deepening personal connections. On this particular morning, Noah stood with Thomas before a large presentation board displaying the finalized designs for the Mercer Winters Foundation headquarters, a renovation of a historic Preston building that would house both Thomas's Mathematics Learning Center and the administrative offices for their expanding educational initiative. The community response has exceeded all expectations, Thomas noted, reviewing the fundraising totals Noah had compiled. We've reached the capital campaign goal 3 months ahead of schedule. Noah nodded, making a final adjustment to the architectural rendering. Preston has embraced the concept completely, though your 30 years of teaching certainly contributed to that enthusiasm. Thomas smiled modestly. Community investment reflects community values. The Foundation's mission resonates because it addresses needs people already recognized. The development of the Mercer Winters Foundation had evolved organically from their initial concept discussions into a substantial organization with clear purpose and growing impact. What had begun as transformation of Thomas's personal savings had expanded through community partnerships, educational collaborations, and strategic planning into an institution positioned for long-term significance. The board meeting this afternoon should finalize the first round of innovation grants, Noah reminded Thomas as they gathered materials for their presentation. 10 projects initially, with potential for expansion next funding cycle. These grants, supporting teachers and artists developing integrated mathematics arts curriculum, represented concrete implementation of the Foundation's mission. The selection process had attracted applications from throughout New England, each proposal offering unique approaches to bridging technical precision with creative expression. As they drove from Newton to Preston for the board meeting, the familiar route now comfortably routine after 18 months of regular travel, they discussed upcoming milestones. Thomas's official retirement at semester's end, the Foundation, headquarters groundbreaking scheduled for spring, Noah's growing professional reputation following several award-winning community projects. Susan mentioned the Thanksgiving arrangements, Noah said as they approached Preston. She's insisting on hosting again this year, though she's requested your apple pie and my mother's cranberry relish recipe. Thomas nodded, smiling at this domestic detail. Thanksgiving at Susan's has been tradition for decades. I'm pleased. She's incorporated your contributions so seamlessly. The casual reference to holiday plans represented the complete integration of Noah into Thomas's established family rhythms, no longer guest or newcomer but essential participant in shared traditions. Similarly, Thomas had become integral to Noah's professional network, attending design unveilings and contributing mathematical insights to architectural challenges when appropriate. The Foundation board meeting unfolded productively, with grant selections finalized and strategic planning advanced for the coming year. The diverse board, educators, artists, business leaders, community representatives, had coalesced into an effective governance team unified by commitment to the Foundation's mission. Afterward, as Noah and Thomas walked through downtown Preston toward the renovation site, they encountered Elena Martinez, home from her first semester of college for a brief autumn break. Perfect timing, Noah greeted her. We're just heading to review construction progress. Would you like to join us? Your internship contributions are evident in several design elements. Elena accepted with evident enthusiasm, falling into step beside them as they continued toward the historic building that was gradually transforming into the foundation headquarters. Her summer internship at Noah's firm had confirmed her architectural interests while providing valuable experience for her undergraduate studies. The integration studio concept we developed has become central to my academic approach, she explained as they walked. My professors were initially skeptical about combining algorithmic modeling with hand-drawn techniques, but the results have been convincing. This integration of technological precision with artistic methodology perfectly exemplified the educational philosophy underlying the Mercer-Winters Foundation, breaking down artificial barriers between quantitative and qualitative approaches to understanding and creating. At the construction site, they toured spaces taking shape according to Noah's designs. Classrooms with mathematical proportions subtly incorporated into architectural elements, gallery areas where student work would be displayed, meeting rooms designed for collaborative projects between diverse disciplines. The central atrium incorporates principles from Claire's original designs, Noah explained to Elena, pointing out features inspired by his mother's work. The light patterns will shift throughout the day according to precisely calculated angles, creating different experiences depending on time and season. Thomas watched this exchange with quiet satisfaction, his son sharing professional knowledge with a young person whose education had been supported through their scholarship, the Foundation, creating tangible connections across generations and disciplines. After Elena departed for other commitments, Thomas and Noah continued their site inspection, discussing technical details with the construction manager and adjusting implementation plans based on progress to date. The Learning Center should be operational by January, Thomas noted as they reviewed the construction timeline. Perfect timing to coincide with my retirement. The center represented Thomas's vision for post-teaching engagement, not withdrawal from education, but evolution into a different form of contribution, focusing on students who needed specialized approaches to mathematical learning. Speaking of timing, Noah said as they concluded their site visit, "There's something I wanted to discuss with you, a potential opportunity that's recently emerged." They walked to a nearby cafe, a regular meeting place that had become part of their shared routine, and settled at their usual corner table. "The Seattle project?" Thomas asked perceptively, recognizing something in Noah's expression. Noah nodded, impressed as always by his father's intuitive understanding. "The university contacted me yesterday. They've reviewed the preliminary concepts and want to proceed with full development of the Mathematics and Arts Center." They walked to a nearby cafe, a regular meeting place that had become part of their shared routine, and settled at their usual corner table. "The Seattle project?" Thomas asked perceptively, recognizing something in Noah's expression. Noah nodded, impressed as always by his father's intuitive understanding. "The university contacted me yesterday. They've reviewed the preliminary concepts and want to proceed with full development of the Mathematics and Arts Center." The project represented significant professional recognition, a major university commission based on design concepts integrating principles from Claire's unused models with Noah's contemporary sustainable approach. If completed as envisioned, it would establish Noah's firm nationally in the specialized niche of educational architecture. "That's wonderful news," Thomas said sincerely. The design concept was extraordinary, truly innovative integration of mathematical principles with functional spaces. "It would require extended time in Seattle," Noah continued, addressing the implication Thomas had immediately recognized. "Probably several months during the initial development phase, then regular visits throughout construction." Thomas nodded, absorbing this information with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Your firm has grown sufficiently to maintain Boston operations during your absence?" "Yes," Noah confirmed. "Martin and Layla are fully capable of managing ongoing projects, and modern communication technologies make remote collaboration entirely feasible." What remained unspoken though clearly present in both men's thoughts, was the personal implication of Noah's extended absence, the interruption of their established patterns of regular connection, the physical distance that would temporarily replace proximity. "I've been considering how to approach this opportunity," Noah continued after a moment, "and I've developed what might be an unorthodox proposal." Thomas raised an eyebrow, inviting elaboration. "Would you consider accompanying me to Seattle for part of the development period?" Noah asked. "Not permanently, of course, but perhaps for a month or two during the intensive design phase. Your mathematical insights would be invaluable for the computational aspects of the project." The suggestion, professional collaboration across the country, represented evolution beyond their established patterns of connection. No longer was their relationship defined solely by geographic proximity in New England. It had matured to the point where temporary separation or shared adventure seemed equally natural expressions of their bond. "An interesting proposition," Thomas replied, considering its feasibility. "My retirement timing would actually accommodate such an arrangement, and the Learning Center operations could be managed remotely during initial implementation. The university would cover accommodations for both of us," Noah added. "They're eager for the mathematical elements to be as sophisticated as the architectural components." As they discussed logistical possibilities, timing, duration, professional roles, the conversation expanded to include personal dimensions of returning to Seattle together. For Noah, it represented opportunity to introduce Thomas to friends and colleagues who had known him before their connection was discovered, to share formative locations from his childhood and early career. For Thomas, it offered chance to see the city where Claire had built her life after leaving Preston, to understand more completely the environment where Noah had developed into the man he had become. "We could visit Claire's grave together," Noah suggested quietly. "I think she would appreciate that somehow." Thomas nodded, visibly moved by this prospect. "I would like that very much." Their discussion continued through the afternoon, expanding from immediate project considerations to broader reflections on the journey they had navigated since Noah's first letter had arrived in Thomas's mailbox nearly 2 years earlier. "I never imagined this trajectory," Noah,